Redditors whose job requires them to go into other people's houses. What is the weirdest crap you've seen? Went into a woman's house that had a life-size replica or mannequin of herself mutilated and murdered. Turns out, she's a semi-pro actress. She's been an extra in a dozen or so motion pictures, one of which was a B-level hack film. The special effects crew made a latex replica of her for a couple scenes in the movie and let her keep it afterwards. It was very real looking. From a foot away, you'd think it was a real mutilated corpse. Creepy, but I can't blame her for wanting to keep it. Story 2. Approximately 70-year-old woman fell in her trailer and injured her hip or femur, but was able to drag herself to the couch and climb onto it. Unfortunately, due to her injury, she was unable to walk. Plus, the trailer was a disgusting hoarder situation with clutter everywhere, so navigation was already difficult. She sat on the couch in the same spot for approximately 10 days until a neighbor called 911. When we arrived, she was naked and covered in 10 days worth of feces and urine, and was physically stuck to the couch. The worst parts were that the rats that also lived in her trailer had eaten 2 toes on the left foot down to the bone, and approximately half of her right foot. She had such bad neuropathy that she said she could feel minor pressure on them chewing, but no significant pain, and was unable to kick them off. On top of that, she had several sores on her inner and upper thighs, along with a skin tear on her right forearm that had live bugs in them. We had to peel her off the couch, which caused a large portion of skin to slow off as it was dead and decaying after soaking in urine for a prolonged period of time. I've never smelled anything worse than when we broke that seal. The crazy part is that she had a phone near but didn't want to call 911 because she didn't want to spend all day in the hospital. The neighbor that called had been coming over and giving her food and water, but didn't call us for 10 days since she said she didn't want us to and it didn't seem that bad at the time. I still have a hard time processing it all, but this is just one of many. Edit. Thanks for the awards. If you have elderly family or neighbors, be sure to check in on them when you can. And don't hesitate to call 911 if you truly think someone needs it, even if they don't want you to. Let us show up, and we'll sort out the details. Story 3. Working a double-staffed ambulance backing up a rapid response car called to take a patient with leg injury to the hospital. As we arrived, I caught the distinct smell of death at the front of her driveway. The solo paramedic came out of the house and was obviously trying her best to mouth breathe. She gave a handover that the patient had a leg injury over a month earlier. She was a hoarder and looked after her adult son who had significant learning difficulties for whom she was the sole carrier. The solo described the wound as worst she had ever seen or smelt. So we enter, follow the pathways between flyers and pizza boxes and etc. The patient was sat on a chair in the lounge. To one side, a pile that was once a sofa stood forlornly but inaccessible from the litter-strewn pathways. The patient was in good spirits and didn't want to make a fuss. She had caught her leg on a trolley, and she was diabetic. Living in the hellscape was prime breeding ground for anything but hope. The leg was necrotic from the shin down at least. Skin and other tissue hanging and dropping off freely. To my surprise, she wanted to walk out. Not that we had much choice given the environment. We got her onto the trolley, eventually, and organized social services to come take care of her son. She was a lovely lady, ex-nurse. She asked me if she'd be home later that day or not. I said it's unlikely, but we'll see how it goes. The smell? I can still taste the air. As we drove away, I noted bits of her leg falling off onto the sheet as I tried not to chunder. Air conditioner on, extractor on, mouth breathing, chewing gum, nothing was working. Even after we had discharged her and I had a Marlboro Red, not for wanting to return to smoking, but to cleanse my airways. Yes, a Marlboro Red was more inviting even as an ex-smoker. The smell still hung in for a good day or two. Never found out what happened to her, but I've literally smelt dead bodies, days old, that haven't come close to her in the 8 years since. Then there's the walls of adult content, the adult content toys, weapons, etc. in other homes, but that is just one of my crazy finds. Story 4. I have an older neighbor that lives alone, and I noticed last month that there were a couple of days of newspapers on the porch. That was very unusual, as if he goes away, he'd stop it, and it was unlikely that he was anywhere as he's a real homebody. Plus, I had seen him the weekend before, and he looked really run down. I told him he should go to the ER or clinic, but he didn't want to because of the cost. I called the cops for a wellness check, and they had firemen come and were able to get into the house, but he wasn't there. Turns out he was in the hospital. He had a friend drive him there to avoid the ambulance charges. When he got home, he thanked me profusely for calling in that wellness check. Now he has also told me where the hidden key is and gave me the code to his alarm system in case anything like this happens again. I also made sure that his sister, who lives on the other side of the city, has my number if she needs to get in touch with someone nearby. Story 5. I was at a house for a cable TV service call. Customer wasn't home, so I called him. He said, "I will be home in 5 minutes, and don't freak out, but I have a tiger on the truck." When he got there, he had a tiger in a cage on the back of his truck. I got to pet the thing, feed it a little, and then went on to see his venomous snake collection, his hand grenade collection, and his hot sauce collection. The very next day, I was at another service call and asked the customer to get to the pole in the backyard, and he told me that he has a tiger in the backyard, so don't freak out. I got to pet the thing and feed it a little. I had been working cable for 18 years at that point and had never encountered a tiger in all that time. I have been working cable 7 years since then and have had no further encounters with tigers in that time. But for 2 consecutive days, I visited homes with tigers. Story 6. Just recently had a client who was fairly normal on the outside. Clean cut, steady factory job, decent car, etc. Inside his house, the roof was rotted through, there were holes in the floor, dead rodents in the kitchen cupboards, etc. The weirdest thing was that he kept talking about his wife, but it was abundantly clear that no one lives there with him. This guy has a completely normal life on the outside, but is definitely off. Edit 1. For those who asked, it's construction or contracting. Edit 2. For those who asked about the rodent situation, the guy had a lot of desiccant and dehumidifiers, so they weren't really decomposing, more like mummified, which is why they didn't smell. I shadowed a home health therapist once. We went to a house where we had to tuck our pants legs into our socks because of fleas. We drove down this dirt road, and I thought we were going past these abandoned single-wide trailers, but then we parked in front of one. This trailer didn't have steps to enter, you had to boost yourself up. The floor was rotten through to the ground in places, and there was a grandmother with 6 young kids in there, including the one we were seeing who had hydrocephalus. But the mother never got it treated and neglected the child nearly to the point of death till Grandma found them and took the baby. Grandma was really trying her best, but this place was the most unsafe place I had ever seen. Story 8. My dad's business partner bought a home on our street after the lady who lived there passed away. She didn't have any living relatives. My dad was tasked with getting the place cleaned out and ready for contractors since we lived across the street. The woman who passed was always a nice lady, and we'd often go hang out with her on her porch, where she taught my sister and I how to knit. We were never invited inside and never really asked to be. At my age, I didn't really think anything of it. Anywho, my dad was really excited to show us the place, but kept a secret that was so crazy about it. We walked in to find out she was a hoarder. The entire house was filled with 6 feet tall piles of junk, save for the walking paths through each room, which were actually quite neat, and the bathroom, which only had a pile as tall as the toilet seat. What was strange is that it didn't even smell much at all. I'd seen hoarding TV shows, and they always noted the horrible stench. It definitely didn't smell good, but all the junk was basically brand new things still wrapped up in their packaging, or their store bags. It seemed she just had a shopping addiction, but was still a neat lady? Edit. It seems a lot of other users have similar stories, especially with older relatives. I wonder if it's some sort of biological instinct to gather random junk, like nesting, when you're older. Story 9. I did home hospice nursing for a few months. You'd be surprised how cluttered and dirty even homes in nice neighborhoods can be. I had one house I went to. The patient had vomited all over the carpet hours before. The family member said they didn't clean it up yet because they were waiting for someone to bring them carpet cleaner. So they laid a towel over the vomit pile and chunks and Mind you, this carpet was matted and stained all over. It didn't need specialty cleaner. They could have used any cleaning product they had on hand, and it would have been better than waiting hours. Depending on the quality of the carpet fibers, leaving it in there could leave permanent stains, just FYI. Story 10. I worked tech support for a major telecom provider, and a big part of my job was dispatching technicians for on-site issues. I've worked for enough telecom companies to know that they are all evil, profit-driven, borderline cartels without a shred of decency or compassion. But I was pleasantly surprised by one thing. Technicians had an absolute ability to just nope the F out of any call at their own discretion. If the customer made them uncomfortable, made them feel unsafe, interfered with the job, refused to take instruction, didn't clear the work area, conditions were unsafe, unsanitary, anything, the techs could walk off and the company wouldn't bat an eye. A note would be left on the file for that residence and the customer would get one chance to rectify the issue. If it happened again, a denial of service would be issued for the address. In some very rare circumstances, they were not given the second chance. The company even went so far as to instruct their techs that if they encounter an infestation, they get right into their service vehicle, strip down, bag their gear, put on their spares, and file a reimbursement claim for a full set of new gear, toes to chest. Probably more of a liability thing than a corporate decency move, but I was surprised regardless. I have a good friend who runs a cable company, and that thing about the infestation is 100% true. Story 11. During my plumbing apprenticeship, I worked in North London for the local authority. Our job was to go into houses and update their boilers to new high-efficiency boilers. One home was a top-floor flat, and we were told in advance that the guy who lived there went by the nickname of Birdman. He was called this because he left his windows open year-round, allowing all the pigeons to roost in his place. On approach via the stairway, you could smell the ammonia from the bird crap. By the time we got to the door, we were gagging and called the job off. The local council had to call in deep cleaners in hazmat suits to clean the place before any work would go ahead. In another place, a guy lived there who I'm pretty sure had some mental health issues. When we got in, he had broken computer parts covering every single square inch of the floor. He said that he wanted us to remove our boots to work there, but we flat out refused on health and safety grounds. Whilst we were there, he spent most of his time on the phone calling local zoos asking what they did with their spare porcupines. He was calling because he wanted to eat them. When they refused, he accused them of being racist as he claimed to be from Africa, and it was a delicacy for him. He was a white guy with a North London accent. Not saying he couldn't have been born in Africa and immigrated, but it sounded made up. Last was a very friendly family, but their place was a mess. When we got in, they offered us tea, which we politely declined. When we got into the kitchen, there was dirty cups and plates stacked head high and decomposing fish on the floor. It was gross. The worst part was having to get in the bedrooms. One room, which was barely big enough for one adult, had 3 adult men staying in. It smelled of old mildew and sweat. When one of the guys got up out of bed to give us the room, his toenails were so long that they made a tapping noise on the laminate flooring, kind of like the velociraptors in Jurassic Park. I'm not sharing this to make fun of any of these people. They were clearly living close to or on the poverty line. If anything, I think these type of people need more help from society. Better mental health resources, more living space, and just general wellness checks could all help these people. Story 12. Oh God, I have so many. The one that springs to mind first is the house where the firefighters already on scene pointed to the carpet and said, "Careful, there's poop on the floor." But I haven't seen evidence of pets. The whole place was bad. Then there was the old man whose only clean part of the house was a small portion of his bed where he slept. Everything else was covered with clutter and filth. I have no idea how food was made in his kitchen or how he used his bathroom to either bathe or crap. The bathroom was similarly covered with junk and filth. There just wasn't a clean surface anywhere. Think about the ruins of buildings you see in post-apocalyptic video games like Fallout. Think about how dirty, stained, and cluttered those bathrooms and kitchens are. Then quadruple the amount of dirt and random junk in any given room so it covers every flat surface. And you're getting pretty close to this guy's house. I took pictures and filed a report with Adult Protective Services. This guy couldn't care for himself. It was really bad. Story 13. Not weird, but really sad. Had to go check an apartment because we had a tip that there could be moisture damage. The apartment belonged to a retired older man, and apparently when he had a nurse visit him at home, they had made the report to building maintenance. When we got to the bathroom, me and my partner saw something that haunts me to this day. The ceiling was black. The walls were black. Everything was covered in a solid black wall of mold. The man living there had no sense of what it was or what it meant. That mold had to have been growing for quite a while, and I have no idea how long he had lived there breathing it in, without no one even coming to visit to see and report it. I have no idea what happened to the apartment or the resident, but I'm sure the bathroom had to be fully made anew, and I'm hoping the man is living somewhere safer. Story 14. Not my story, but my wife's. She was what amounts to a very well-degreed social worker. Her job was to do in-home assessments on people with mental health issues. She has lots of stories of filthy homes, but she had one client that she visited, and the house was absolutely disgusting. Spoiled food and garbage everywhere. Unimaginable smells. Clearly, the client did not clean. My wife noticed they had small, open sores all over her ankles and wrist. She was super concerned of picking up bed bugs at this time as one of her coworkers had that happen. She noticed a tiny bug crawling on her slacks, tried to brush it off, and immediately completed the assignment. She ran to her car, took off her pants and shoes in the parking lot, tossed them into the trunk, and got into the driver's seat and called me. We left her car outside in sub-freezing temperatures for the next few days. Afterwards, she found out it wasn't bed bugs, but fleas. The place was infested with fleas. Story 15. When I worked in pest control, I went to a house that called us for roach problems. Shocking. As soon as I entered the home, I knew it was going to be bad. The smell nearly knocked me down. I had to make an excuse to go back to the truck right away just to take a breath. I returned with my mask on. Inside the house was the mother of 3 small children. The smell was something that I really hadn't smelled before. And in this business, you smell a lot. The house was dirty, but not in the hoarding way at first glance. Just basically a typical house that was obviously run by the kids and lazy parents. Kitchen was dirty, looked like about a week of dishes piled up and scraps of food on the counters. But still, nothing explained the smell. As I started up to the attic, the little girl ran by my ladder, started to pull down her pants as she ran to her room. I looked away, but she left her door open. As I climbed into the attic, I noticed that she was squatting and taking a crap in the middle of her room. After she left, I looked in her room and saw piles of human feces all around her room, dried up. I checked the other kids' bedrooms and found the same thing. The mom didn't even bother to clean up, knowing that she had an appointment with me. I made some excuse to schedule another follow-up later. I left. Before I even left the driveway, I called Child Protection Services. Story 16. I wouldn't say weirdest, but the laziest and most disgusting thing I ever had to deal with was when I worked for the housing community. We were installing all new boilers for all the houses. Every set of rows had a dumpster. Well, every resident was giving a month notice that we would be entering the houses and would need access to the closets to drill holes for the pipes. We go into a woman's apartment. It's a girl I went to school with, and she tells us we can't come in, so we had to get the property manager, and when we enter, we get blasted with this horrible odor. Then we get to the closet, and they are 6 feet wide, 10 feet high, and it's floor-to-ceiling garbage bags and dirty diapers. We had to call off the job till the place was cleaned. This girl was paying $30 a month for everything and couldn't even walk 30 yards to the dumpster with her trash. So nasty, so lazy. Edit. Mental illness is one thing, but willingly having 3 babies to multiple guys and living off child support and government assistance, claiming you live that way because you want to see your babies grow up, is a choice. These women aren't heroes or brave, strong, independent women who don't need a man. There are plenty of single moms that hold a job while going to college and still get to see their babies grow up. Story 17. Had a client who had 2 full closets of clothes, but said they had nothing to wear. I cleaned, organized their clothing in each closet, providing them with many outfits to choose from. They also had 3 drawers full of socks. Hundreds, many of which were one of a kind in a different drawer. Took me hours to sort and match, and get rid of the ones that had no match. I was a CNA there to provide health services, but many people needed a lot more than that. One lady had 3 closets, many clothes no longer fit her, worked every time I was there to try to organize her things, provide her some outfits put together for her to choose from. Also, could never get used to finding wads of money stuck everywhere. One lady had me looking for her social security card, which she thought someone from our agency had stolen. I found it in her safe, stuck in her deceased husband's wallet. While looking, I noticed a large amount of money there. She was wanting me to take her to the bank to get money. I advised her she had cash in her safe. She asked how much. I told her I didn't touch it, but we went back and counted a few $100s and gave her her social security card. She was one of the meanest people I ever met. We called ourselves the Survivors, as she fired people all the time. She lived to 103. Story 18. I was a paramedic and then later a police officer for many years. I've seen enough hoarder situations to last me 10 lifetimes. Probably the most odd thing I've ever seen was in the home of a sweet, old elderly couple. Their home alarm went off in the middle of the night due to a malfunction of some sort. This is a very common call. My partner and I showed up, and the couple was very nervous that someone had broken in, so they asked us to do a check of the inside of the home, which we agreed to. The house was pretty big, including a very large finished basement with lots of rooms and a crazy array. It actually reminded me of Buffalo Bill's basement from Silence of the Lambs, but cleaner. We opened one door and found a square room about 12 by 12 feet. Walls alternating painted blue and red, but the odd bit was the room that had nothing in it but a single chair directly in the center and eye bolts in the concrete floor, one on each corner of the chair. The chair was one of those old school chairs you'd find in a 1960s office or waiting room. It clearly looked like this room was designed for some odd sexual fetish or interrogating Al-Qaeda. I remember when I saw it, I stopped dead and stared. It was so creepy. I felt like I walked into the set of a Kubrick film. My first thought was I'd turn around and find the old homeowner with an axe ready to take off my head. My partner, who was directly behind me, looked in and said, "Well, we just found the discipline chamber." Fortunately, he didn't grab my shoulder first, or I might have shot him. Had we not been given permission to search the entire house, I'd have worried there were people captive somewhere in that home. Story 19. Once upon a time, I worked in law enforcement. Did it for about 10 years. Spent about a year or so in criminal investigations, working special victim type of cases. SAs, child and elder abuse, neglect, domestic violence, internet crimes against children, working with the state task force, and missing or endangered persons. One day, me and my partner were working on a case of mine about possible child abuse reported by a school. I don't remember the specifics, but I believe it ended up being unfounded. Kid was upset that his Xbox was locked away after doing something and told the school counselor he was being beaten. I spent a month doing random checkups at the school and at home. Never found anything out of the ordinary. Anyway, one Saturday, the first time me and my partner stopped by to meet with the family, we got a surprise. The place I worked during this time was pretty rural, fairly low income, in BFE in the southern US. We are sitting at the table, kids are playing Xbox again, grounding was over so he got it back, chit-chatting. I'm facing the living room and my partner sort of has her back to it. Suddenly, I see a brown and black furry creature about the size of a cat go galloping past. But it wasn't a cat. That I was sure of. My partner notices that I seem bewildered and asks if I'm okay. Yeah, I think I just saw a dang monkey. Oh, that's Jerry, the mom says and gets up to collect Jerry. Sure as crap, they've got a freaking monkey. They had a larger sized house that allowed for Jerry to have a room all to himself, complete with jungle gym and a hammock thing hanging in the corner to sleep in. I got to hold Jerry. Well, he kind of hung onto my arm for a minute or two like it was a tree branch. Apparently, they crap wherever they feel like and can be a bit bitey. The mom said they're more trouble than they're worth. I asked my supervisor later on if I should look into how they got it or consult with a friend of mine who worked for the state's wildlife and natural resources enforcement, but was told not to push the issue unless we needed to down the road. So me and Jerry got to be bros for a few weeks whenever I stopped by, and by bros I mean he was a huge butthole. For some reason, monkeys make me feel very uncomfortable. So if I was in this position, I would nope the F out of there instantly. Story 20. God, I have a few. 1. Went to visit a house with a 55-year-old ex-army man who refused to wash. Bathroom installed in county cottage, but this man still crapped and peed in a bucket and threw it out the window. Wiped his butt with his hand. Cobwebs so thick there was dead birds and mice in it. Kitchen rampant with rats. He saw no problem with this. 2. House had rubbish up to about 6 feet in each room. Kitchen and sitting room had no flooring. Puke-filled sink with whatever crap all over the counters. Blood sprayed on windows. No food. No cutlery. There were 5 kids living in this. 3. Older man never cleaned his house. Just accumulates more crap. A musician refused to put anything on his bottom half, just sat there with his tiny chicken saying hello to me and ignored repeated requests to dress. House raided after he was taken away in an ambulance. Hordes of CP upstairs. Horrific stuff. This man was a local celebrity. 4. Alcoholic man who was having a few days of fun celebrations with friends. I turn up to do dressings and open his bandages to find Bug City alive and, well, eating his skin clean. Disgusting, but hey, they did a great job of cleaning the wounds. 5. Do not underestimate how dirty and odd people live. Story 21. I posted this before somewhere, but it fits. I used to work as a tidy-up man, German speaker, sorry for strange words sometimes, and saw a lot of really strange things in houses, which had to be normal for the people. Maybe the behavior is considered an illness, but it's really strange anyways. So the people were already dead when we cleaned the houses. I was younger back then and forgot to take pictures. The newspaper couple, an odd old couple, lived in a small flat, and the only thing they did was to sort and organize the free newspaper you find in front of your door. But they had a special way to do this. They cutted every headline, every picture out of a bunch of these newspapers and put them into ring holders. They did for over 40 years. We found papers from the 70s. Every wall in the flat were ring holders. But at some point, they didn't manage to do it right. They started to put the newspapers they still had on the floor. The floor in the entire flat was full of newspapers up to 50 centimeters. In their basement, we found a small box filled with stones and sand and water. It was labeled Scoured and Packed 1968. In German, this hits the humor my college and I had, and we still giggle about that, and I'm going to do my best to pronounce this, Abgekotcht und ingepackt, the bottle lady. She was a retired gynecologist and lived in her old doctor's office. The interior was from the 70s and there was everything like in a normal doctor's office, but she lived in this thing with no bed, no kitchen. She slept on a couch in the waiting room. The only non-doctor's office thing was a TV she placed there. In the laboratories was a fridge for medicines. She also used for food now. She was an alcoholic and drank gin only and brought the same small bottle from a small supermarket. But she didn't throw the empty bottles away. She placed them all over the doctor's office, her home, everywhere. Gin bottles on every surface. Mountains of gin bottles. She only had a small path from the door to the couch to the TV to the toilet and the fridge. Gin is my alcohol of choice, but I do not like it that much. Story 22. Not me, since I never went in student rooms when I was on college staff, but the other folks in the IT department would be called in to fix someone's network connection, the wired Ethernet, and occasionally come back with stories, usually just bongs and adult content, sometimes really filthy rooms. It turns out that some students not only don't do laundry, but enter and exit their rooms through the ground floor window, meaning that the door is actually not navigatable for the dirty clothes and other kipple on the floor. Department policy was that staff would not enter a student's room alone. More than once, the student who wanted their network connection fixed was glad to see the IT people, but the student's girlfriend, who just woke up naked in their bed and may have been looking forward to a lie-in and or wake and bake before morning class, was somewhat surprised to see the IT people. The IT people were never warned that there would be a naked person in the room, not even with a scarf on the doorknob. Story 23. Social worker, a split personality, schizophrenic autistic with OCD. He loved many things, and each thing has a separate part of the house dedicated to this single thing. A Mercedes wall with hundreds of Mercedes models and merch. His mother's hand-painted plates, 50-odd pieces. Romanian traditional leather dancing belts, 75-odd pieces. 70s gay adult content of husky men. An entire wall plastered with cutouts and a decent collection of homoerotic retro adult content toys on display. He was straight though, no homo. An impressive collection of Bibles signed by hundreds of priests, bishops, and even royalty. He loved herb jars too, had hundreds, all neatly sorted. An entire section of his apartment dedicated to various ceramic cookingware, crock pots and the like. Apparently, German crock pots are the best. Who'd have thunk it? Imagine this and more, all in perfectly ordered sections in a house, like a museum. And God help the fool who would touch or even worse, move anything. I bumped a model car, and his caretakers told me it took him 3 weeks to fix it and forgive me. I'm still not allowed near the Mercedes wall. Good man, though. Many funny stories. Smoked like a Chinese industrial park, too. Story 24. I've got 2 experiences while working as a cable TV install tech. 1. I installed at a home hosting a adult content toy party, as in selling the toys. I saw a variety of toys I had no comprehension even existed, along with fake chickens of every shape and size. 2. Showed up to a home to install internet 15 minutes after a dish guy showed up to install the TV. He tagged the door as nobody home, so I almost just left a tag of my own and split. Decided to take a quick peek through the window after knocking to make sure nobody was there, and saw a woman about 60 years old passed out on the floor. Called 911 and they instructed me to try and get in while help was on the way. Found a window screen I could take off and slide the window open, and after getting in, there were open pill bottles all over with pills scattered everywhere and a few bottles of vodka empty or spilled. She tried to take her own life, and I caught it soon enough for help to arrive and save her. Never got to install the internet, so I didn't get paid for that job. Story 25. A full ceremonial dungeon. In an otherwise incredibly gorgeous multi-million-dollar home on the beach in Hawaii. The home had no solid corners in the entire thing, only colored glass windows in every corner as to have no demonic entities trapped within. And when I say a ceremonial dungeon, I am not talking about an S&M dungeon. I am talking about a full-blown, literal dungeon room carved out of stone with medieval candle holders on the walls and an enormous long table with high-backed chairs. The chair at the end of the table had a round window in the ceiling overhead that looked up to another window in the next ceiling above, which we were told aligned with the full moon on a certain night of the year. So I'm at least in the top 10 here, right? Because I've been trying to figure that crap out for like 18 years of what I saw. Edit. Since this got popular, here are a couple more fun details. The courtyard in the middle of the home is shaped like a giant Zeus-style lightning bolt. There is a crazy little Isaac Newton-style observatory on the roof where the final glass window in the floor resides. The dungeon was dug down into the ground, and there was this huge light-up spiral staircase, like you'd see at night at the freaking Roxbury. Color-changing, white plexiglass stairs with a color-changing hand railing, like a slutty Apple store. And big too, like 2 to 3 people could walk down shoulder to shoulder. And then, boom, you're in a freaking granite medieval dungeon. It sounds creepy as heck, but it also sounds like a great place to play D&D. Story 26. It wasn't what I saw, it was what I didn't see. Way back in the day, I worked in legal aid. It was a noble calling, but it was tough and paid nothing. Sometimes we had to go to clients' homes if they were physically unable to come to us. We were on like the 23rd floor of this dilapidated building in downtown Detroit, so it wasn't uncommon to trek out and meet a client. We got a call about a bankruptcy. We usually farmed those out if they were too complicated, but we still had to go. My intrepid paralegal and I trekked out to a house on the east side in one of those neighborhoods that had, for lack of a better phrase, seen better days. Nevertheless, most of the people on the block were trying, mowed lawns, flowers, etc. One house was an absolute mess. Lawn like the freaking Great Plains before the Dust Bowl. Several crappy cars tossed about, crumpled porch. My paralegal looks at me and says, "That's gotta be them." And of course it was. The couple was nice enough to us after we crawled over the porch like we were crawling through the trenches in Normandy. Were there trenches in Normandy there? I don't know. Both were in wheelchairs, raising the question of how the crap they got out of the house, but I did not even think to ask because my mind was on something else. The smell. The smell of cat pee. Smell does not even begin to describe it. It was a funk of cat pee. It saturated every crevice of that house, hung to our clothes, draped over my coat. My paralegal was this awesome gunner kind of kid. He was probably 5 years younger, but whatever. And I could tell he was trying so hard to be pleasant. I was too, but OMFG, that smell. It was the stench of 1,000 cats from ancient Egypt to Garfield and back again. Somehow, we got the details of the job losses and the sadness and the disabilities and the horrid things that happened to them in their life. All the while, the smell we became the smell. We escaped eventually, fleeing to the car and bringing the smell with us. We did not speak of the smell because no words needed to be said. But halfway back to the office, paralegal says to me, "Did you see any cats?" No, I did not. We brainstorm. Maybe they were in a back room, but no meows, no litter boxes, no cats. I have no idea where the cats were, if they ever existed, or or if they were invisible, but that smell was on my clothes so bad that I had to dry clean them. Trust me, I was not wearing dry clean only clothes on $30,000 a year. I swear the smell lingered in my car, but I don't know if that is true. I just know that I never saw a freaking cat in that house. Story 27. I walked into a travel trailer to perform wound care on an elderly diabetic man. The floor was covered in human feces and urine. He was laying in bed, wrapped in blankets, made and also covered in feces. At this point, I decided to walk out and fully gown up, put on boot covers and an N95. I have to move several 5-gallon buckets overflowing with feces and urine to get to the man. I cleaned up his legs, which had several large diabetic ulcers in them, dressed the legs, and immediately left and called Adult Protective Services. I could have walked away as it was an unsafe environment, but those wounds looked very neglected and needed cleaning. I have no idea if APS was able to do anything. I'm guessing the county and police got involved. He was renting the trailer from a friend. It had no sewer or running water. The trailer was gone a few months later when I drove past it again. I also once knocked on a patient's door, just a normal knock to let them know I arrived. I heard a loud thump and yelling. The knocking scared him and he fell. I got into the house and found him on the floor. His femur was broken in the middle and bent to the side, like he had a second knee. Story 28. I, thankfully, don't have to go into people's homes. But my dad does, as he works for an internet company in the Midwest. The area he works in is full of interesting people. I know I've heard dozens of stories of the horrors of other people's houses, but aside from the elderly men that brick their computer with adult content and claim, "They don't watch that stuff," or clear hoarders with feces everywhere insisting he takes his shoes off in the house. He never would. He always tells people that he isn't allowed by his company for insurance reasons. One story from my teenage years sticks out more than others. He visited a middle-aged woman's house who was complaining about her internet not working. Pretty standard stuff. He showed up, noticed the inside of the house reeked of crap, and was told the modem is downstairs and led to the basement. The lady told him, "Careful, we've been keeping our puppy downstairs because he likes to bite." Bit of a red flag, but my dad still decided to go downstairs. Told us that everything in the basement was soaked in urine and covered in dog crap, but found it a little odd that after 10 minutes or so, the dog hadn't appeared. Didn't think much of it and continued to work on the job at hand. As he tracked some of the cables, he stumbled upon a python he described as being about 5 to 6 feet long, and soon saw another in the basement. One was moving freely, but the other had quite a large object in its stomach that kept it mostly stationary. He then left the home without fixing the internet, citing it to his work as a danger to his safety, and never had to return. Story 29. Never had to go into someone's house for the job, just delivering onto their roof. Roofing shingles. But one house always sticks out to me. We get there to deliver, should be there 45 minutes at the most. Semi-small town, maybe 2,000 people tops. Surrounded by nothing. So the house isn't anything crazy. Homeowner greets us and says he'll be in the detached garage and some friends will be coming over. He looks to be around 50. Long white beard, little overweight with overalls. Pretty normal for the area. Tall, lanky guy in his mid-40s comes over, fits the same rural Midwestern American look as the homeowner. Then a kid, no older than 16 or 17, who seems to be trying to look like a gangster with a pit bull shows up and walks into the garage. I just think, he doesn't seem like the type to be friends with these guys, but whatever. So I'm on the truck next to the garage, sending shingles up to my partner who is on the roof of the house. Suddenly, dense white smoke is coming out of the smokestack in the garage and smells like cat pee. My partner asks, "Does that smoke smell like cat pee?" When I tell him yes. He says, "They're definitely cooking meth in there." So we decide to kick our pace up a notch and knock out the job in less than 30 minutes. As we're strapping the truck back down, the homeowner strolls out to thank us, and the tall lanky dude walks out behind him, smoking a meth pipe in the open. No F's given. Like, holy crap, dude, is this okay? Are we in danger? Is this homeowner about to tell us not to mention anything we see here? Just nope the F out of there. P.S. As an added bonus, while delivering, we heard the neighbors across the street yelling, glass shattering, a woman running away, then a guy sitting on the porch, pretty obviously holding a pistol. Glad I never went back to that town. Story 30. I've already left one comment, but here's another. Trigger warning. Dead person and somewhat nastiness. I'll try to be polite about my descriptions, but you've been warned. Again, was a cop for a while years ago. Spent most of my time working on patrol, the guy who shows up when someone calls the cops. One of the calls we got frequently were welfare checks. Someone calling asking us to check on another person for whatever reason. These could range from inane, where an older person forgot to call into our dispatch program that kept an eye on seniors living alone, to occasionally someone attempting to harass another person by sending the cops out. Think domestic issues and such, sending us out to do their dirty work, none the wiser. And finally, to situations like this story where a person had not been heard from in some time. In this particular case, a man lived alone and had some type of terminal illness. He had no family or friend in the area. A friend drove from a few days out of town after not being able to reach the man for almost 2 months. After finding the man's car in the driveway but no answer at the door and not seeing anything in the window, he calls us. After hearing the above description on the radio, I already know what time it is and tell the dispatcher to give a call over to the EMS station closest and wake them up, but don't dispatch them yet. Let them get a chance to have a cup of coffee or something since it's going to be a long few hours, and it was very a.m. We get there, talk to the complainant. He already knows what's up as well. Make an attempt to get an answer at the door, and the sergeant gives me the go-ahead and boot the door. Well, not really boot it. The other guy on scene had one of those Halligan tools since he was a volunteer firefighter. Once the door is open, I'm immediately met at the door by a poor medium-sized dog who is skin and bones. He is very happy to see us. The smell is immediately apparent, and the complainant backs off a bit while we continue inside. The other officer with me is relatively new and had not had this kind of situation yet from either law enforcement or volunteer firefighting, so he is a bit more struck by the smell than I was, but it was still quite overpowering. Though I had come prepared with a surgical mask and a swipe of Vaseline right under my nose, but it was cutting right through it. We continue in, me taking the lead, followed by my reluctant rookie. We find another very skinny but happy dog in the hallway. We make it to what appears to be a bedroom door shut. I can almost see fumes of decaying odor come out from under the door. Or maybe the powerful stench is starting to make me somewhat delirious. The rookie pleads with me, "Please don't make me open it." I nod for him to do it. He pushes but meets resistance. Again, still resistance. We push together till we get it cracked. I shine my light through and see him DRT, dead right there. Open it a little more so I can squeeze through, since I was much smaller than my coworker. I get in just enough to confirm with the back of my hand that he is cold, before I see that he appeared to be melting somewhat. He'd obviously been here for a bit. It then occurred to me that the complaint mentioned 3 dogs and a cat. I found the third dog, a little Pomeranian type. Fur matted, had been locked in the room with the deceased. Fat and happy. Yes, if you get my drift, that is exactly what happened. When EMS showed up, along with the coroner, we were able to get the door all the way open. As they started packing him up, or attempting to, the coroner described to the EMTs that meat just falls off the bone after a little while. The rookie handed me his flashlight and F the heck out of there. We saw that it appeared that something had been eating off portions of tender skin and muscle in some places down to the bone. I stood there and held the 2 flashlights while they did their best to collect the poor man. I tried not to watch, but the coroner would occasionally bark at me to keep the lights on the body so they could see. Even the EMTs seemed to be a little queasy after a bit, but the coroner was unfazed. I felt really bad for the guy, for the dogs, for the friend. It was a crappy situation to go out like that. For months afterwards, I would catch a whiff of something and it would remind me of that smell. Never did find the cat, though. Story 31. This is a different speed to most other posts in this thread, but I heard Reddit likes potatoes, so when I was in high school, I did in-home peer tutoring, usually for kids from my church whose parents had heard I was a dork. My senior year, I worked with one of the most popular guys in school, varsity in multiple sports, homecoming king, all that jazz. My dude kept a vase full of potatoes on his desk at all times. One of those tall, long vases you might put over a pillar candle in a wedding centerpiece. I went to his house practically every single week for an entire school year, and every time, there were basic, boring russet potatoes filling this ornamental vase. I'm pretty sure the potatoes were changed periodically, as they never rotted or grew eyes, but I don't think he was snacking on them either because his mom strictly forbade any eating outside of the kitchen, including relatively clean things like apples or carrots. Why she tolerated the potatoes remains a mystery. This was way before camera phones, so I couldn't snap pictures to compare week to week or anything. He was actually an incredibly nice guy, not at all your stereotypical mean high school movie jock. He probably would have been happy to tell me what was up with the potatoes, but he never volunteered an explanation, and for some reason, I'd convinced myself that'd be weird to ask. Like, what if desk potatoes were a thing at my school and I was out of the loop? Or what if his dearly departed grandpa had been a potato farmer or something, and it'd be a painful memory? Obviously, none of that makes any sense, but I was a very anxious teenager, with a bit of a crush, to be honest, and got super in my head about the whole thing until, eventually, I simply could not bring myself to ask the coolest kid in school about his desk potatoes. They remain a mystery to this day. Story 32. Worked for a subcontractor of an energy company, basically doing gas meter maintenance. Really just swapping out the battery in the unit. Anyways, I walked around with a unit that gave me the address and the location of the meter. An example, inside east wall. Sounds easy enough, except when you worked in rougher areas. This was the best thing I'd seen in my life. Knocked on the door, and this little old lady answered. She seemed sweet enough. I told her what I was there for, showed her the unit that showed me the meter was in the basement, and I just needed 5 minutes or so to swap a battery. She was fine with it and led me to the stairs. She was in rough shape and opted not to walk down with me. Not a big deal, since there really wasn't a point to her standing around while I swap a battery out. On my journey to the meter, I passed a table with the biggest bowl of weed I have ever seen in my life. I don't mean a bowl in the sense of what you pack for a bong hit. I mean like one of those 8-quart Pyrex bowls. This thing was mounded and overflowing onto the round 4-person table. Then I heard it. A door opened. Crap. Some wannabe drug lord weed dealer is going to beat the brakes off me because I was let into his den. Some 14-year-old looking kid walked out, flipped the F out on me with the "get the F out of here" and some other shrill high-pitched squealing. I didn't get to do my job, marked the house as "can't access," and left. I'm sad I didn't get to at least tell them it's cool and buy some off them. This was in maybe 2008 or 2009. Story 33. Late to the party here, but I worked as a pest control tech. So many elderly folks with pets have portions of their house that they can't get to or don't get to very often, and their pets have figured this out. Tons of elderly folks have a room or hallway or second bathroom that is just full of feces and urine their pets go in. It's really terrible. Weirdest thing was a house full of folks who were from somewhere in Asia that had converted their backyard into a full garden of vegetables and fruits. Just massive. 2,000 plus square foot of yard that was rows and rows of food. Go into the house, and this 3-bedroom, 2-bath house with a basement has maybe 12 to 13 people living in it. Just people on top of people. And throughout the house, in the kitchen, and on other hard surfaces like tables and counters, there is just raw meat sitting out. I got called to this house for a roach treatment, and they were everywhere. All around the house, in the yard, crawling up the siding, and the lady who I was communicating with just couldn't grasp why she shouldn't leave raw meat out of packages. All over the house that was infested. Maybe more gross than weird. Story 34. Oh, this post was written for me. Hoarders, definitely. I've worked in almost all the states, so I could be talking about your neighbor. All of these are death scenes I've personally been to. Buckle up, this could be fun. Male in late 60s, well-being check. Package delivery guy called as a package delivered 5 days earlier wasn't touched. Found suspended naked from his enforced ceiling beams by waist, thighs, and wrist in crawling position. No furniture in room, smooth wooden floor, full-length mirrored walls, with over 100 different sized and shaped dildos suction cupped in various places so he could swing into them. Pulled up to a home that police and firefighters refused to stay inside. Rolled my eyes at these guys and walked into a female that passed from natural causes. On her clear plexiglass false floor with thousands of doll heads staring up at us. WTF? One of the other rooms in the house was all clowns. Fastest clear time in that house. Then, as a medic, one house a guy fell off his roof. Injured, but not life-threatening. Super clean house. Man worked in public service. Said his pet was in the room off the kitchen and needed to be fed. Lunch was binned in the top shelf of the fridge in that room. Was insisting to keep the door shut. I'm a farm girl, so I figured he had a litter of kittens or pups in his suburban neighborhood home, so I went to feed them. No smells or anything less than shiny in this house. Walk in the room and close the door. Pull the bin from the fridge, confused as it was about 20 pounds of raw meat, to turn around and see a 5-foot alligator sunbathing in a tub-like setup. My dumb butt froze and then threw the bin down and ran. Alligator did nothing. Fairly sure he didn't care. The man had an exotic rescue license and a headache from my screaming. The rest of the crew had a great laugh. Story 35. Not necessarily weird, but kinda mind-blowing. When I was around 18 in New York City, I worked for one of the top antique or art restorers in the city. We walked into this lady's apartment to polish some of her antiques when I looked up and saw this huge painting on the wall. A pond with water lilies. Is that a freaking Monet? Oh, there's a Renoir. Another Renoir. Oh, there's a Picasso. This woman came down the hallway and asked me, "Who are you?" I told her who I worked for and she said, "Come here." Standing there with a mullet, Van Halen t-shirt and purple sweatpants, I thought I was in trouble. She grabbed my hand and said, "I've had people come here from all walks of life and have no idea what they are looking at, and you just named every artist on these walls from a casual glance." She then proceeded to show me her $100+ million art collection. She then made me a sandwich. The maid later told me she doesn't even make her own sandwiches. LOL, nice. Rich old lady. Story 36. This doesn't seem too bad compared to some of the other accounts, but it still always stuck with me. I worked for a moving and storage company back in the early 90s and saw a lot. Once we moved these hick hillbillies, then we showed up to this old farmhouse. There were at least 5 cats and several dogs. The wife took us into the basement and hiked up her house dress to spray bug killer on her ankles as it was infested with fleas. Their stuff was just basically stuffed into trash bags. Normally, we would start on the highest level of the house and work our way down. They had a daughter whose bedroom was in the attic. She was about 14 and very developed. Her parents had a blackboard in her room with daily instructions such as wear deodorant, etc. It was just creepy. It was summer, and after we had gotten most of the junk out of this disaster of a house, we noticed the 14-year-old's navel was pushing out noticeably against her tank top. She was pregnant. Mind you, this house was alone in a field. Nothing around it, no neighbors, just a house in the middle of nowhere. I can only speculate as to who got her pregnant or whatever happened to her. We would always laugh about the screwed up lives of the wealthy people we've moved, but this family was real inbred. Story 37. Just typed out a long story, but realized that nobody cares or will read about my actual job I had. This topic is only about the crap in the houses. So once, back in like 2008, I went in this house that had dozens and dozens of bongs. A bong on every surface, sometimes more than one. Bongs everywhere. Bongs of all shapes and colors. Every bong had a dildo in it. Every single one. Every bong had a dong. And there was a dong in every bong. Bongs and dildos. The owners of the home were a very normal seeming generic white mid to late 30s couple like you would see in a freaking PTA meeting or at the local microbrewery packing down onion rings and IPAs. And they just acted like their bizarro chicken and bong collection was something normal. They didn't mention it or react to my presumably shocked expression. People are weird, man. Edit. This was a long time ago, but I don't recall the place smelling like weed. It was just like the collected bongs and fake chickens. Story 38. I work in apartments, management, and renovations. I've seen some absolutely crazy stuff from people living with 10,000 roaches. It was an old lady with quite a few cats, literally walked in and the floors moved type of stuff. That was also our pest control's estimate, not mine. To a dude that built a rock wall in his own house. Highlights of what I've seen. Doing apartment inspections, guy wasn't home. Had a single chair in the middle of the room, a TV, and Xbox plugged into a socket on the floor. A single mattress with only sheets, and maybe 6 to 8 empty 30 packs of natural light, with hundreds of beer cans everywhere with random half-decayed food. We had to talk about whether or not we should do a health and safety violation with that. A dude had maybe 50 lizards and reptiles lining the walls of his house. He apparently used them for educational purposes and brought out his 9-foot snake. No idea what it was, and freaked out one of our investor people. Really cool guy. Walked in on just 2 dudes hitting a bong. I guess they didn't hear us when we knocked, so we had to just go in. They immediately ran into their rooms, coughing like mad, trying to hide everything. Walked into an apartment stacked to the walls with trash. We couldn't even get to the second bedroom. We had to do a health and safety violation. It was so bad. Those smells still haunt me. Went into an apartment and everyone had just forgotten we were coming. We post 48-hour notices. And when I walked in and knocked on one of the bedroom doors, a guy opens it, his eyes go wide, and just yells, "Somebody is in our house, Mom." Went into an apartment of somebody who was murdered with a hammer to see if we wanted to trash all the appliances due to the blood. We definitely trashed all of those. That was really messed up to see the mark where the blood pooled. Some people weren't home when we went in and apparently forgot about the notice saying we were coming in. We found basically a crack house. Needles everywhere, tin foil with black in the center, crack pipes, whole shebang. We eventually non-renewed them for serious lease violations. That was nerve-wracking trying not to have one go through my shoe. I already mentioned him, but Rockwall guy was cool. We walked in and were like, "Oh my god, this is so cool." He told us some stuff about him traveling the world. It was cool. I've got some more stories if people are really interested. I've seen some insane stuff so far. Story 39. I work as a caregiver, and when I was new to the house, this guy wouldn't talk to me. He sometimes wanders into the staff bathroom, and he can use it, but he has his own bathroom. We mainly make sure he isn't going to drink soap or another cleaning supply. I went in to see what he was doing and to see if he needed help with anything. I found him in there with the lights off. After asking if he needed anything, he motioned for me to come closer. And when I leaned in, he whispered, "I am the night." It threw me off and I backed away. He then motioned for me to come closer again and whispered, "Watch your back." He then walked out of the room looking at me and then laughed when he got to his room. He still doesn't talk to me, but will look at me and laugh. Story 40. I worked in safeguarding and had some concerns about a young boy we looked after at school. He was underweight, very skinny. His hygiene was awful, and he appeared not to have slept for quite a while, and we hadn't seen his mother in quite some time. He had transport to and from school, but no concerns by the taxi driver. A lot of red flags. He was very angry, tired, anxious, and refused to talk about how things were at home. Their phone was disconnected. I accompanied a social worker to their home to be told they'd move out a few months ago, but they knew where they had to move to. It was a small caravan parked at the edge of a local fishing pond hiding in the trees. The boy's father was not well, but was doing his best for his son. The mother passed away quickly from pancreatic cancer when he returned from Afghanistan and was struggling hard with PTSD from being there and being widowed so suddenly. They lost their home and barely had enough to eat, but he truly tried hard. Where they were living was just awful. Everything was dirty, flea infested, but the boy's clothes, bed, backpack, and belongings were immaculate. He was terrified of letting the school know about his mother, as he felt his well-documented mental health problems would mean he would lose his boy too. He needn't have worried. We arranged for help to clean up the living space in the meantime, while the social worker and I tried to find a refuge. Harder than you think, because most refugees or shelters are mothers with kids, and many do not allow men because a lot of them are there at the hands of a domestic violence situation, and a homeless shelter wouldn't be appropriate for the boy to stay in. I arranged for him to get an appointment with Citizens Advice to get him set up with financial support. The ladies in the school kitchen sent the little one home with a care package of food every day. We washed their clothes in the school's washing machine. Happy to report that the boy and his dad are doing great now. It took a few months to get back on his feet and working again, and now they have their own place. The boy is healthy and happy, and the dad is doing much better with support from a veterans group and grief counseling provided by social services. Their GP prescribed a membership to the local gym so they could shower there. This was a new me. Removing the child is always the last option. If the father wasn't willing to change the situation and the boy wasn't being looked after, it would have been very different. But it wasn't a case of willful neglect or abuse, no drugs or alcohol abuse, no violence or emotional abuse. The guy was just sinking in grief and despair, just existing day by day. But he was determined to do better, and our assessments made it clear that there was no other concerns other than the place they were living. Things just got out of his control. I'm so glad it worked out, but I'll never forget how bad their living space was. Grief is a powerful thing in itself. Without added trauma and PTSD, it can be very hard to climb back up from grief like that. But he did it. What a guy to overcome that, all in the space of around 6 months. After reading the past many stories, I'm actually glad to read one that had some hope and a happy ending. It actually feels kind of good to read that one. Story 41. Did some work for the Royal British Legion at one time, a charity that looks out for old soldiers on hard times. Most of them were a bit lost, a fair few Alkies, loads of Gurkhas, and several outright lunatics. One had been arrested for waving a knife at Buckingham Palace in his old uniform. Had crap all over his bathroom, but read me a nice poem called Revolution. Julie was a trans lady we delivered to who is possibly the hardest person I've ever met. Had a tattoo on her finger stump and told us loads of stories about unfortunate homophones picking fights with her. Apparently lost her tackle in Gulf War I and just went with it. Made a lovely cup of tea. And then there was the elderly gentleman we laid a carpet for. On moving his TV stand, it spilled easily 100 hardcore gay VHS cassettes on the floor. He seemed embarrassed, but we just tidied it up and said, now what? Delivering furniture to a local halfway house, we had the pleasure of meeting Sex Dwarf, who had awful hygiene and a penchant for pasting hardcore adult content on his walls, as well as a poster and box set of Only Fools and Horses. The lady, who had hung porcelain dolls from every square inch of her ceiling, more than a few hoarders, and oh my god, the dildos we'd find. Many and various. So, fairly tame, but kind of interesting. Story 42. I was visiting a home health nurse specializing in psych care. So this is sad, but also really odd. A very brilliant woman had a stroke and was now under the care of her 80-ish-year-old mother. The woman was now like a child. It was so sad. They would only let me on the bench by the front door and never in the house, but my job is to inspect the house, so they let me in once. They were hoarders, but fairly neat ones. I looked into getting things taken care of there. Turns out, the other daughter was there 3 months prior and had things cleaned up. The neighbor also checked on them. The mother was pretty ornery. My patient was very sweet. It was a shame her stroke was so severe. Every visit I would stop in the driveway to finish paperwork, and the patient would come to the car window to see when I'd be done. After a bit, I started stopping down the street under the shade of a large oak tree so I wouldn't be bothered. Well, one day I decided just to go straight there. I pull up, and sitting on the bench is the mother, not my patient. I get out immediately and ask where my patient was at. The mother replied, "She's in her room. She didn't get up for her pills all afternoon yesterday and all day today." It was 1 p.m. I bolt past her to find her daughter barely breathing on the floor of her bedroom, sitting in half-dry pee. She had a pulse and was breathing erratically. I called 911 and tried to get her on her side since it looked like she had thrown up. She seemed to know I was there, but couldn't move. I then spent the rest of the time yelling at the mother while I chucked old magazines and newspapers to the side to make room for rescue to get to her. I demanded to know why she hadn't already called 911 when her daughter was clearly dying on the floor. Her answer, "Oh, I thought you were coming." I yelled more. Rescue showed up and took her to the hospital. I called DCF, and the patient's neighbor called me a few days later to tell me my patient had made it and they were making other living arrangements for her. I swear that old lady was hoping her daughter died before I got there. She wasn't stupid. Story 43. A few summers ago, I was doing some mover manual labor jobs. This was a period of my life when I was attracted to the idea of a toxic lifestyle because I idolized shows like Shameless and desperately wanted to distance myself from my straight-edge conservative Christian background. Owners of this particular house were the parents of a friend, but people I had never known outside of conversation here or there. They were in their late 50s, and their son was 19 at the time, about the same age as me. House was an old, nice-looking house from the outside, had the appearance of one of those California ranch-style homes from the 40s or 50s. The front porch had some beer cans and cigarette butts on the floor, but nothing that screamed excess or mental illness, just kinda normal for where I'm from. The first thing I noticed was several missing panels from the window in the front door, which the owner would later tell me had been headbutted by a friend of their child's while under the influence. The front room of the house was almost completely devoid of furniture except a couch in one corner that was covered in small pieces of feces and what I assumed was dog hair. The front room had multiple holes in the walls from being punched or headbutted or etc. And I remember there was plaster everywhere. Imagine what it would look like if a pit bull got its hands on a bunch of stuffed animals and went to town, but plaster instead of stuffing. This house was like something from our back rooms. It was one connected room after another, with seemingly no rhyme or reason given to its layout. The next in the string of rooms that would make Stephen King proud was the kitchen. Every cabinet and drawer was empty, the counter piled with dishes that were covered in an unidentifiable grime that was once the residue of leftover food. There was a thick layer of this grime in the sink and around the burners of the stove, and dishes and trash utensils and old boxes of beer lay everywhere. The one piece of furniture in the kitchen was an old 70s or 80s style breakfast room table with no chairs, which was covered in the same grime. A cat tree sat in one corner of the kitchen next to a door to the driveway that looked as though it hadn't been opened in 10 years from the amount of grime and dust cakes onto it. The thing that stuck out to me the most was a singular shelf above the table, lined with empty bottles of long-gone booze, like a late middle-age crisis college dorm room. The next room was the bathroom. No trash can, empty medicine cabinet, an empty roll of toilet paper in the wall, and a pile of used toilet paper taller than the toilet between the sink and the wall. The bathtub was full of dishes soaking in a brownish filth, and the floor, per tradition at this point, was covered in tiny pellets of crap. There was what looked like a giant hamster ball in one corner of the room, which I would later learn was for their 2 ferrets. I also remember a broken children's camp chair leaning up against the water heater next to the tub. This room smelled worse than the bathroom, but not as bad as the first bedroom, where the family kept their pet ferrets. Anyone who has owned one will know that ferrets are great pets, but they stink. Like, even if they are in a hygienic conditions, those boys are smelly. The room they were kept in was the worst in terms of hoarding and trash cans, the only path being from the front door of the room to the back door of the house, and a path from the front door along the bed and up to the Xbox under the TV. Besides that, there was a small couch and coffee table, completely surrounded by your average array of garbage, takeout plates, and utensils. I remember, most of all, a mattress sticking out of the closet which had a massive bloodstain on it and pee stains running down from top to bottom, like a cat's version of the crap stains birds leave running down the Walmart logo. The overgrown backyard was filled with children's toys and garbage, and their shed was filled floor to ceiling with trash they hadn't got around to tossing. Out of all this crap, one of the rooms that stuck out to me most was between the hallway and the room I just described because it was just your average teenage girl's bedroom. It was comparatively clean, had a string of lights around the window, and nice mirror in the corner, and in general looked pleasant. The only odd thing about this room was on the wall opposite the door to the back bedroom, there were names and random messages written on the wall. Nothing horror movie-esque, but strange nonetheless. I never got to see the main bedroom of the house, but for the sake of the memory, kinda wish I had. Sorry for the rambling description, I've never had the opportunity to really describe it or talk about it, and the memory is still so visceral from a time in my life where I didn't know what I was doing or where my life was going. One of the late nights cleaning the house, one of the friends helping ended up doing cocaine on the second floor with the woman who rented it. A few nights later, we got drunk on said second floor, and the owner of the house, who we'll call Thomas, offered to suck my chicken for $50. I declined and never worked on that house again. Husband and wife are now divorced, with the wife getting custody of the kids and moving to California. Thomas is now moved to a town nearby and dating a man his own age who has the same name as me. What a freaking life, eh? If anyone made it this far, thanks for taking the burden of having to read about one of the weirdest times in my life. Being part of that house's history was like being a guest star on Shameless and getting killed halfway through a season. I don't know what to say now. I hope you enjoyed. Additional cursed information. Youngest child used to smoke matches because he thought it was getting him high. Underage daughter was dating a 25-year-old drug dealer who was found dead a few months after the house was sold. Said daughter's chihuahua jumped from a moving truck out front of the house and broke its neck. I had a threesome in one of the bedrooms in the week spent there. Friend of youngest child was on acid when he headbutted the window, was 13 to 14 at the time. There's a lot more to this story that I really probably shouldn't put out there onto the internet. Second to youngest son of the family went missing. I contracted an STD by having sex with a friend of the oldest son in the back room with the pee mattress. Yes, this story, and me including, are disgusting. TLDR. Mover helping a friend's parents whose house I had never been to before. Crap and grime everywhere, signs of domestic violence and mental illness. Owner offered to suck my chicken for $50. What I assumed to be rat pellets turned out to be 2 ferrets who weren't looked after. I regret putting any of this information out onto the internet, and I hope this comment gets buried. Well, buddy, I hate to break it to you, but this is going to be on a YouTube video that gets thousands of views. And of course, it gets to be narrated by me. Story 44. I work in market research where I, pre-pandemic, traveled around the world going into people's homes for interviews that last about 2 to 3 hours. It's hard to nail down any 1 or 2 moments of weird, but there have been lots from all over. Though, I will say that for the most part, people aren't that bad, and it's pretty rare that a place is really bad, and even rarer that it's to the point where you really want to just cancel and walk away. So yeah, I've got some weird ones, but honestly, I've got way more cool ones of really fascinating people. Plus, getting to travel the world and see how people actually live in places I go, and not just tourist stuff, is really cool. Dirty houses aren't too rare, but there's been a couple where we walked into basically hoarder status homes and had to bail. One time that really sucked was when I had to keep the person's dog from climbing all over our client, but the dog was gross and scabby. But we were recording, and if the dog was in the other room, it would bark its head off endlessly. I've seen some people who have very random collections of obscure items, and some less obscure, that they swear up and down will make them tons of money one day. There was one person who didn't tell us, because it didn't come up, that they had a hairless cat. And so randomly, in the middle of her talking, this odd demon-like tail came out from behind them and started flicking around and seemed to match their cadence and tone. We were very confused until they pulled their hairless cat out from behind them on the couch. One house I went to had every surface you could think of completely covered in something having to do with sunflowers. I'm talking the wallpapers, tablecloths, dishes, mats, coffee table, everything. I've also seen a home that was full of chipped and broken wooden furniture, and the person insisted that it was their style and they loved the look of it all. It literally looked like it came out of a dump. And they would purposefully do this to their furniture when they got it. One person insisted on meeting us in a hotel that they wanted to book down the street from their house because for whatever reason, they didn't want us in their house. But the study needed to include their home tech. So, yeah, that didn't work out. One time we interviewed someone in such a tiny studio, I believe this was Paris, that two of our team had to be in their bathroom, one literally just sitting on the closed toilet. But yeah, tons and tons of really cool people too. Majority actually, like a dude who custom built his own smoker and got super into it, or a dude who taps the maple trees on his land for his own syrup. Or someone who made custom skateboards with custom designed icons for each member of their family. One of the funniest moments was when we interviewed a younger person in a really tiny studio apartment. Started the interview with a cup of Starbucks next to them. At one point said, "Oh, can you excuse me for a minute? Sorry." Went into the bathroom that was all of 2 feet away from where we had to sit, turned on the water faucet, and proceeded to drop a big old deuce. Took a decent chunk of time. Then came out, looked at us, and just said, "Sorry about that. Had to, make a business call." We thought it was so funny, we to this day use that as code for when we want to go back to our hotel and take a crap. "Hey guys, let's swing past the hotel. I gotta make a business call." Story 45. I was an inspector for a housing insurance company. My area was Putnam and Westchester counties in New York. So every other week, I'd have to drive out about 6 hours and do inspections on various residences for a week. The inspections would be an exterior survey of the property, take measurements of the perimeter, and take notes of the structure and integrity of the home. If the residents were home, I'd ask to look in the basement and take a pic of their circuit box. I did this gig for about 3 months because as things went on, I realized I was getting more and more crappy areas and houses to inspect. I suspected the general manager didn't like me much because he thinks his wife made a pass at me, but I digress. One of the last inspections I did was in this semi-trailer park-like area, although they weren't trailers, just run-down single-story homes. I was having a hard time locating a house I was to survey, so I stopped and asked a woman walking her dog which house it was. She pointed in a direction and said something to the effect of, "Way in the back, keep going around the bend." I pulled up to a small brown house with a covered porch. I got out and walked up to the porch and realized it was infested with giant carpenter bees. Humongous bees. I stood there for a few minutes and I hear a woman and man inside screaming. Then one of the largest men I've ever seen comes out of the front door, through the bees, and approaches the steps. He was about 6'5" and 500 pounds, wearing just overalls, no shirt, and walking with a cane. I'd guess he was in his 60s. I told him why I was there, and he asked me to come inside. I hadn't asked yet, so he shuffles back inside, and I ran through the bees in the door. I was hit in the face by some awful smell of cat crap and urine and dank old rotting magazines. As I walked through the living room, they had piles to near the ceiling of magazines. Everywhere. The ceiling was dropping and peeling paint. Snapped a few pics and asked to see the basement. I was led outside to those outdoor entries where you lift the 2 large doors on the ground. He told me to go first. In my mind, I said, "Yeah, I saw this movie. No way." But I mustered the courage and started down the stone steps. I got a few steps down and started looking at the floor. It looked weird. I couldn't place it. It didn't look like a regular floor, and as I got closer and closer, the more off it looked. I just couldn't tell what it was. Then I took my final step and sank about 1.5 feet deep in water. Holy crap, the floor I was looking at was still water. As I turned to nope the F out of there, I nearly ran into the guy who was literally a step behind me. As I bumped him, he tried to turn around but was falling backward. I thought, this is it. This is how I go out. Crushed and drowned by a huge fat guy. But I pushed him back before he fell on me. He got his footing and walked back up the stairs. I ran back to my car and took off back to my hotel room. I quit a couple weeks later. Story 46. I was a maintenance assistant for a couple years, and there were lots of things that weren't conventionally weird, but just odd. One old lady had probably 2,000 dolls in a smaller 2-bedroom apartment. Every room had bookshelves with dolls of all kinds. Precious Moments, American Girl, etc. I can't fathom how much that all cost her, but I bet it's a huge reason why she was in a small apartment rather than a house. Another guy was on the spectrum and had OCD. Great guy, absolutely hilarious, but he would call over everything. He found one nail on the trim in the hallway that stuck out maybe 1/16 of an inch. He asked us to pound it in flush. There was a chip on the tile in the bathroom. He needed it to be caulked and then painted as close to the color of the tile as possible. And the guy would stand outside on windy days in the fall and sweep leaves off his sidewalk and in front of his garage. Oh, and he had a massive collection of retro baseball cards, like pre-1960 stuff. Just a very fascinating guy. I'll take the bait, though. I was outside and didn't see it myself, but my dad, the apartment supervisor, and his friend, apartment owner, went into a unit to change the stove. The tenants, a young couple, must have forgotten we were coming that day. On a dry erase board, the wife drew a very detailed picture of a woman giving a guy head with the caption, "I can't wait to suck your huge chicken when you get home." My dad and his friend walked out laughing so hard that I thought they were going to die. Story 47. Alright, as a medic, I've seen some really bizarre stuff. Everything from hoarders to neglect cases that make me cringe to this day. But there was one house that really creeped me out. We got called late at night for a cardiac arrest, way out in the boonies. So we knew we would just be going out there ultimately to pronounce death. Finally arrived at this totally trashed residence with all the usual hoarder detritus scattered in and around the place. The young man who had called us was distraught, knowing that his mother was beyond help at this point, and he took us inside. The whole house was just hideous. Piles of trash and rotting food that made getting around a challenge. We found his mother deceased in her bedroom, which was completely filled with dolls and clown toy figurines. Shelves had been built on all the walls, and everyone was crammed full of these porcelain dolls that just seemed to stare down at you. Had to be hundreds of them. Meanwhile, the son was having a total meltdown and insisting on trying to move his mother's body outside and trying to gather her jewelry, so I and a firefighter basically had to stand guard in the bedroom while everyone else tried to corral the son while we waited for law enforcement to arrive. As we were standing there in the bedroom, being thoroughly creeped out by the dolls, I crap you not, I thought I saw one of them move. I pointed it out to the firefighter, and suddenly the whole shelf seemed to come alive. All of the dolls moving and jittering as I totally kept my cool and did not scream like a little girl at all, despite statements to the contrary. Turns out there were big fat rats running around in the shelves behind the dolls. I've never noped out of somewhere faster than I did that day. Turns out, part of the reason the son wanted to take the body outside was that he didn't want the rats to get to her. Story 48. Doing a house inspection, and I start to take the stairs down to the basement when I notice the walls are painted black. Next thing I see is spray paint in red saying things like, "Where are you going, female dog? Get back down here. You can't escape." Turns out he had a gym down there, and this was some kind of motivation. Was pretty unnerving for a moment, especially because I had ended up going down the stairs in front of the guy with him following close behind me. Edit. Remembered another one. I went in to inspect an apartment, and the woman who lived there had an autistic son. I get inside the hallway, and I'm feeling for the light switch but can't find it because something is covering it. When I eventually do get to it, I realize all the walls are covered in aluminum foil. So is the furniture and TV, except the screen. It was a first for me, but I assume it made the son feel more comfortable, so who am I to judge? The only other thing of note was they only had one bed. The mom slept on a chair, so I put a note in my report to have someone follow up and offer an additional bed free of charge if the mom wanted it. Story 49. Not me, but my boyfriend used to work for a pharmacy and had to deliver a prescription to an old woman. When he arrived there, he knocked on the apartment door, and the first time no one answered. He knocked again, and then he heard a thin voice telling him to enter the apartment. When he entered, the apartment was empty except for a stretcher in the corner of the room. He walks in and is shocked. The voice then calls him to another room in the apartment. He followed the sound of the voice and turned the corner to find himself in a room full of trash with a table also full of trash, mostly Toblerone wrappers. The old lady is sitting across the table. She removes a pile of garbage that was in front of her and tells him to put the prescription there in front of her. My boyfriend says he stepped over the rubbish, leaning over the table to deposit the prescription. Then, at that moment, he sees her crotch under her t-shirt. She was not wearing any underwear, just a t-shirt sitting on a pee pad. She gave him a $2 tip, and he felt dirty putting it in his pockets. Story 50. Went to pick up a lady from her house. She dialed 911. We got to the house. It looked old and small with a 4-foot metal wire fence. We got out of the truck and opened the fence gate. It was nighttime and we noticed the entire yard glinting as we approached the door. We both looked at each other and thought, well, weird, but whatever. We couldn't tell what it was, so shrugged and rang the bell. The lady yelled from somewhere inside that the door was unlocked and just come in and help her. So my buddy opened the door and we both about died. You know that moment where Frodo gets stung by Shelob and he turns green and some crap shoots out of his mouth? Yeah, that was us. The wall of cat pee, ammonia, fish, phosphine, putescence was paralyzing. We just stood at the door for a good 30 seconds. I could not inhale. My buddy stepped back, got in a few good breaths, and headed in. He came out with the lady 3 minutes later. I could not be around either of them. I drove. He sat in the back with Vicks Vapor Rub plugging both of his nostrils. The lady got strapped down, then told us to check on her cats. We both noped in unison. She had 40 cats. She didn't clean after them. Every inch of her yard was covered in cat food cans. She did not clean otherwise. Cat crap and pee everywhere. I hope she got a lot of help at the ED we dropped her off at. Story 51. Was a painter and decorator, so worked in many houses. 1. Went to paint a room in a rented house, the landlord giving us the time and place. When we walked into the lounge, every third floorboard had been ripped up to be used as firewood. 2. In another house, I asked if I could use their bathroom while doing a small paint repair. The elderly couple, 70-ish maybe, nodded and one showed me to the toilet. I was standing there having a pee when I started to focus on the wallpaper. It was just a black and white print, but when you looked close, it was an orgy scene, just a jumble of bodies in all positions and quite graphic. 3. Wallpapered more than one room and come across peepholes looking into other rooms or bathrooms. 4. Did one job and the owner used to follow you around, standing behind you as you worked, and now and then whispers, "This could be the straw that breaks the camel's back." 5. Did one job and one wall of a room was just covered in pictures of Jennifer Lawrence. Not neat and tidy, but collages, all jumbled and joined together. The guy himself looked perfectly normal. 6. Once had to repaint an entire brothel. That was interesting. Story 52. Story time! I was a cable guy in Virginia back in like 2003. Worked the whole Hampton Roads area, so lots of military folks. This one was a house with a handful of Navy guys, all fairly young. Internet was out, so I was there to fix that. I go outside and find there was a temp drop waiting for burial that someone had ran over with the lawnmower. Easy fix, pull a new drop, done in 5 minutes. I go inside and let them know it's done. I don't see anyone. I walk up to check the modem in the upstairs room and it's working well. I still don't see anyone. Then I hear a female moaning. I look across the hall and the door is open and there's a guy filming people banging. They're filming adult content and taking turns on this girl. I don't want to intrude, so I just stand by the door hoping someone will notice. Nope. I inch closer and wait. Rinse and repeat. Eventually, I'm standing in there watching the whole thing play out. Dude standing by for his turn says, "Pretty hot, isn't she?" I agree. She looks pretty good. Then he says, "Hey, Dave, want in on this?" I think a second and figure, screw it. When will you get the chance to be the cable guy in an adult content again? So I join in. I'll never forget that call, and no, I haven't been able to find the video online, and I've done a lot of searching the past 16 years. Story 53. Post-COVID and vaccine era. Home vaccinations are popping up. You call the state hotline, make an appointment, a third-party company confirms these appointments, then sends people to your house to vaccinate you. I'm here going house to house vaccinating people. One apartment I stepped into, I was greeted by this grotesque smell that I can't describe. Open the door further and see a super aggressive 28-year-old kid running around the house, breaking stuff, drinking everything in sight, and spilling it everywhere. As I am walking, I notice the ground is sticky, but I can't comprehend what it is. The owners are barefooted, so it can't be that bad. There's a yellow film on the floor with brown speckles everywhere. Step into the living room trying to hold my breath. I see 2 mattresses with no covers. Nothing else in the room. The dad is sitting on one mattress looking disheveled and half-dressed. The mother is standing right in front of me begging me to vaccinate her son. The second mattress was yellow and brown and visibly wet, soaked through and through. The top of the mattress had lumps of wet and dried crap all over. I looked on the floor and it dawned on me what I was stepping on, what was so smelly and sticky. I tell the mother I can't vaccinate her son if he's running around wild and being aggressive. She begs me to sedate her son and vaccinate him. I noped out of there, and I tell her to clean up the house and call back when her son is not being aggressive. Story 54. I used to be a videographer. We filmed in so many nondescript offices and homes. But for one shoot, we were hired to produce a promotional film for a growing housing development around a lake in rural Texas. There were no hotels in the area where the client, rich landowner, could put us up in. Instead, they invited us to stay at their house. Given that we had a 7-person crew, I thought this sounded odd, and then we got to the house. It was gated, at least 20 acres of land, which included a 9-hole golf course. But the house itself was unreal. It was made of stone, and the decor would be best described as Harry Potter meets cowboy chic. The dining room table was 50 feet long and was covered in wax mountains from all the candles that had been on it. There were multiple game rooms, video games, a pool table, slot machines, etc. The fireplace was big enough that 4 or 5 people could stand in it. If I recall correctly, it slept 70 people. There was a bar that was behind a giant locked iron gate. They had countless bedrooms with bunk beds, designed so the family's kids could have big parties. The owners were gone. They just let us take over the house. So we wandered around and eventually found an underground concrete bunker with more video arcade games in it, as well as a theater, not a movie theater, but the kind where actors perform on stage. We went in the garage and found a live monkey in a cage. We later discovered a kangaroo wandering around. Then it got weirder. We heard there were secret rooms and passages. We figured it was just a joke or myth. But then one night, while we were drinking tequila at the 70-seat dining table, we found a barrel of maps. Yes, a barrel, and it was filled with maps. I unrolled a few and eventually found one that wasn't a map. It was a blueprint of the house, and it showed that there were secret rooms. We began exploring and eventually found them. One was behind a fake bookcase, and then in that room there was another fake bookcase. If you found the switch, the bookcase lifted up into the ceiling, revealing another tiny room filled with magic tricks. Then we found a secret room hidden behind a grate in the hallway on the 3rd floor. It led to, I'm not kidding, a slide. You lay down in the slide, pushed yourself into the darkness, and flew down 2 stories around twists and turns, all in pitch black, and then came to a stop in another secret room behind the spice rack in the kitchen. But the creepiest thing we discovered was a secret tunnel that wrapped around the entire perimeter of the house, which had multiple secret doors into various bedrooms. You could travel on your hands and knees from bedroom to bedroom, entering and escaping through secret doors built into closets and shelves. Our little crew, fueled by tequila mind you, crawled through the tunnel system, which at times required climbing up ladders and ramps to go from floor to floor. At times, you could very easily peer out of the grating and into a room, meaning that you could spy on people from the tunnels. But my favorite detail is that they had a framed photo of Hillary Clinton photoshopped onto the body of some BDSM model right in the entryway. Right, Texans are freaking weird people. I would love to explore a home like that, just as like a tourist attraction. So if anyone knows any places, put them down in the comments down below. I would appreciate it. Story 55. I install HVAC. A middle-aged Asian, we guess Korean, guy that had an entire collection of Sailor Moon and other anime paraphernalia, including 2 locked glass cases of action figures. He also had a ton of cosplay girl pictures on the walls. That was weird, but nothing too crazy. Then we go into a room to hang a unit, and there is a mannequin all done up in a female outfit with an entire female wardrobe. Kinda weird, but we figured maybe he had a wife or girlfriend that we just hadn't seen. Then we go into the basement to run wires, and this is where it gets really weird. The entire basement is painted for children in a circus theme. Really bright colors, polka dot rugs, racetracks, and dollhouses. And in the corners is a wall full of women's shoes. It creeped all of us out, and we started to look at all the photos to see if we saw any women or kids. The dude really didn't have any photos of himself or any kind of family. Any photos out were basically just fan art and cosplay girls. We spent all week making up crazy theories about this guy being a serial killer or into weird kinks, but never did get any answers. The guy ended up being really nice, albeit a little socially awkward, and never gave off any creepy vibes. But dang, that house was weird. I actually know a guy that's very similar to this last story in real life. He doesn't have the mannequin or the clothes, but he definitely has the figures in glass cases. Really nice, chill guy. But then you go into his house and it's kind of creepy. We call it the cave. Story 56. A woman, who I assume to be late 50s based on the condition of her hair, skin, and general appearance, by which I mean a bad late 50s, not a nice, well-groomed woman, had stacked up every can of beer she had consumed over many years. It was mostly John Smith's, a cheap ale popular in Britain, and Stella Artois, and she had clearly left the final remnants in most of them. This made the entire house reek of stale ale. Imagine the worst dive bar you've ever been in and multiply that by 5. I was genuinely gagging, and I had to demand she opened a window. Now, this place had cans to the ceiling, across the full breadth of 3 walls, and in some areas this constituted multiple layers. One wall was 4 layers deep. I couldn't begin to calculate the quantity, and my colleague said there was a similar amount upstairs too. During the course of talking to her, a child appeared from under a table and tried to put stickers on my shoe. I asked if it was her grandchild, and she said it was her daughter. She had her 3 years before. She was actually only 35. After we left, my colleague called social services, and I was told the child was later taken to live with her grandparents. Story 57. I'm a property manager. There are so many people who have kept an ungodly amount of trash and or pet waste in their apartment. One had a dining room filled floor to ceiling with trash that smelled so terrible it was making the neighbor sick. I walk in, closet filled with trash, a kitchen that had a pile of dirty diapers in the corner, an apartment with every wall lined with floor to ceiling of empty pizza boxes and or 2-liter soda bottles. Carpet that squished when you stepped on it because it was so saturated with dog pee. There was a girl who never washed her underwear. She just put the dirty ones in a garbage bag in her closet, and I guess bought new ones to wear. If she'd have sold her dirty panties, she probably would have been able to pay her rent and avoid eviction. After she was forced to leave, we found a bag of dirty panties and a lot of dirty dildos and butt plugs. There was an apartment that was infested with roaches to the point that they did not scatter when the lights came on. They just looked at you like, "Welcome to our home." We offer pest control for free. They didn't want us to treat the apartment because they believed the chemicals and the pesticides were bad for their newborn baby. There were literally roaches in the baby's crib. Story 58. My favorite customer quote that I've heard far too many people say to believe it ever: "I didn't have time to clean before you showed up." Literally feces all over the floor, bugs crawling around everywhere, cockroaches inside their electronics. My only thought, how do people live like this? I've been to places that have no doorknobs, not because they removed them, they'd all been shot out with a shotgun. There wasn't even a floor inside, just plywood thrown down. I work for a major cable service provider as a field technician. We've also had our vehicles searched by police right after a visit to a customer's house. Come to find out, the police were about to bust in on warrant arrest, but we showed up and interrupted it. They searched our vehicles to make sure we were not helping them get away. And then there's the adult content toys, just out and about, not a care in the world. I get it, it's their house. Or firearms just openly sitting around loaded. Those people get mad that we won't touch them and ask them to move them somewhere else. The worst ones, in my opinion, are the ones with kids or animals that are very clearly living in hazardous conditions. For the kids or animals. Doing this kind of customer service job has really made me question whether or not humanity even deserves to go on. Bring on the next extinction event. Story 59. I am a retired detective and current computer forensic examiner. I still go on search warrants, usually for internet child exploitation crimes. Sorry, I'm not answering any questions about any particulars about my job. I have seen some crap. When we get a house that's reasonably clean and orderly, it's a real relief. Often these kids of dudes live in filth and chaos. Even as a regular street patrol officer, I never saw this kind of hoarding, lack of cleaning, or basic maintenance of homes. I've seen bathrooms that were half caved in from water damage, electrical panels that were jerry-rigged and caused us to call the city to condemn the residents as a fire hazard, rotten bags of trash with bugs, pee jars, jugs in piles, numerous weird adult content toys, some made to look like a child, printed photos of kids with splatter on them. Hoarding is really common. Beds with clothing piled on top, spilling all over the floor, mixed with trash and old food containers. Sometimes we can't figure out where these people sleep. Often the other residents are living the same way, but sometimes we will see a family where only one of the kids is trying to keep it less gross. One time, a guy had a bucket next to his desk with crap in it. He said he dumps it in the toilet, which was basically stained black from never being cleaned. He had a bucket next to his desk to crap in. An open bucket of crap. Not all homes of predators are like this. Sometimes we actually get very normal appearing suspects. Usually, it's a moderately disheveled bedroom or computer room, but the common parts of the house are reasonably normal. I'm pretty convinced there is a strong correlation between this sexual deviancy and other serious mental illness. Story 60. As a chimney sweep in Germany, I have seen some crazy crap. One guy definitely takes the cake though. So, I'm on my normal work routine in a district that is new to me, and where I don't know the clients yet. I have to go into every apartment in a standard apartment complex to check the gas heater. I knock on one of the doors, and as soon as it opens, I literally jump back. Standing opposite of me is the most zombie-looking guy I have ever seen. Completely gray, leathery skin, sunken bloodshot eyes, dressed in a very old green parka, and just terrifying to look at, even as a horror movie fan. Nonetheless, I got a job to do, and so I proceed to enter the zombie lair. Here's where crap gets really crazy. Pictures of the Queen cover every square inch of this dude's apartment. Blows my mind to this day just thinking about it. Completely surreal. Literally everywhere are pictures and memorabilia of the British Queen in a zombie's apartment in the middle of Germany. I make my way to the bathroom with the back against the wall while this creep is following me and just silently staring me down with his dang red eyes. I just want to get my job done as quickly as I can and get the frick out ASAP. All of a sudden, the guy starts to speak to me. Well, not really speak as much as I mumble and ramble incoherent stuff. From what I can gather from his ramblings, this crazy guy is absolutely convinced that he is the Queen's illegitimate son. That seals the deal for me. This guy is bat crap crazy, and I have to get out. I half crap my job super quickly while planning an escape route in my head in case crap goes sideways. The zombie is getting irate about me ignoring his ramblings and starts getting louder. Not quite screaming at me, but getting there. I say, screw it, grab my things, and push past him and bolt out the door. After my shift, I told the story to my boss, and he was like, oops, LOL, should have warned you about that one. Sorry. Turns out, he had tried to poison my boss twice, offering him bottles of champagne with a clear drill hole in the cork. My boss had the second bottle analyzed, and it turns out there was rat poison in there. He also tried to stab another chimney sweep a few years before. Apparently, he is also barred from entering England because he allegedly tried to climb the fence to Buckingham Palace while shouting for his mom to come out and accept him as her son. Can't confirm that story though, it's just what I've been told. TLDR, zombie is obsessed with the Queen and has tried to poison chimney sweeps. Story 61. As a social worker, I went into some truly awful homes. One was the home of 3 adults, 2 parents, and an adult son, all of whom were lower functioning, and everything was covered in dog urine and poop. The floors were squishy and weak when you walked on them, and there were piles of poop all over the couch and chair. It was hard to breathe. They had 6 chihuahuas that never went outside, and no one ever picked up after them. I had a house that had roaches everywhere, literally everywhere. And when the mom started cooking, they would come out of the cabinets and make lines on the cabinet doors towards the food. Some of them would fall in the food, and the mom made her kids eat it because they're not going to be wasteful. I had an older client who lived in the woods with his wife and adult son. The directions to the home was, stop at the tree that was struck by lightning and walk into the woods until you see the creek. Turn left and follow the creek until you find us. The first time I got to the little clearing, the adult sons were in a fist fight. My client told me that they were fighting over which one had sex with mom that night. He spit towards them and said he never gets a turn anymore. I had an older female client that had just had a complete break from reality. We were talking one day, and a roach crawled across her cheek. She never even reacted, and it just stayed on her face for 20 minutes. I walked into a home where my client of 2 years, who I always got along with great, had a chair in the middle of the room waiting for me. I sat in it, and he told me I'm not very observant. He lifted his arm and had a machete attached to it. He spent 45 minutes running the tip up and down my spine, telling me all the ways he was going to kill me. I escaped. He went to the psychiatric hospital. He hadn't taken his meds for a few weeks, and his schizophrenia had taken over. A client had a monkey that wore diapers, and it threw poop at me. I sat on one client's couch, and she started screaming at me because I sat on him. The guy only she could see. I walked into a home, and my client had cut her leg so bad I could see the bone. Got her to the hospital, went to a man's home, and noticed that something seemed off. Did my visit, left. Couldn't stop thinking about it. Got halfway home and turned around and went back. He started crying. He had just taken an overdose of all of his medicines. What I'd picked up on without realizing it was that his pill bottles were lined up in front of him on the table. He lived. I've seen so many wild things, I could write a book. Life is not what we see on TV. Story 62. I have an uncle who used to be a normal guy, and he still is in many ways. When I was a little kid, I remember him being incredibly handsome, and he worked as a welder making good money. After my grandmother was murdered, he started drinking a lot. Moved from smoking weed every now and then to using harder drugs. He also stopped working regularly and spent most of his time fishing and hunting and being outdoors, which was always his hobby, but wasn't all-consuming. He moved into my grandparents' house, the house he grew up in, after my grandfather died a few years after my grandmother. It got to the point where he was missing utility payments, so he would sometimes go a month or two without water and electricity. He stopped maintaining the house at all, and eventually all of the broken windows were covered in sheet plastic. The floor was sagging in many places. The house was built in the late 1800s, but my grandparents had always kept it maintained and clean. Eventually, the cement porch caved in and he just put a few bricks on the ground, so you gotta walk up the steps, step down into the ground beneath the porch, and then climb up into the front porch. He eventually stopped closing the front door so his animals would wander into the house as they pleased. I once went to visit, and there was an engine from a late 80s model Chevy Suburban being rebuilt on the coffee table, completely with oil and grease everywhere, and chickens freely roaming the house. He had a wife and 4 kids in this house as well. All of the kids are genius-level intellect. His oldest, the only one out of school, was invited to technical schools in Japan, Madrid, Atlanta, and somewhere else in Europe. I forget. He also designed an irrigation system while in middle school. I think growing up without toys or without the distraction of TV made them focus on school more. Though my uncle is also insanely smart and probably the funniest and most quick-witted person I've ever known, I wish he'd have found a way to resize his full potential. Hopefully his kids will. Unfortunately, I see a lot of this happen in my area. Someone will inherit their dad or grandma or whatever's house, and even though they're a smart person, they get lazy with the inheritance and just become white trash. It's kind of sad, really. Story 63. TLDR, my super Christian neighbor has a room full of kinky adult content toys. Not my job or my house, but talk to the repair guy who left my neighbor's house looking a little shell-shocked. Okay, so what you need to know about my neighbor is that she's a crotchety, old, holier-than-thou Christian female dog. Example, I have been best friends with the boy in the house across from me since I was a baby, and one day when I was 10, I was leaving his house. I hugged him goodbye and then went home. She stopped me before I could get to my porch and said, "You know, if boys see you whoring around like that, you won't get a good husband, and I don't want to live next door to a slut, so keep your legs closed." I was 10. Anyway, I was 15 when this story happened. I was gardening and doing outside chores when a plumber came to her house. He was there for 20-something minutes before he left, looking like he had seen a ghost. I asked him if he was okay and what happened. I'd seen the interior of her house before, and it was much like her. Bland, outdated, and overly Christian. Like there were crosses and pictures of Jesus everywhere. He told me that he'd gone to her basement to check on something with her water heater. She tried to stop him, saying it was messy and she didn't realize he'd need to access that room. But he went in and was met with a room absolutely filled with sex toys. Some were really weird, apparently. He didn't elaborate on that. And to make everything worse, several were quite obviously recently used, and suddenly her being around him in nothing but a bathrobe and slippers was very uncomfortable. He fixed the issue and got out. When he finished telling me, he actually looked at me and realized I wasn't an adult and cringed. He asked me not to tell anyone that I told him all that, and I said, "Dude, I am going to do everything in my power to forget what you just told me." That failed, unfortunately. I never looked at her the same way again, and was so glad when we moved 4 months later. Story 64. I delivered pizza for 4 years. This is my weirdest story. I delivered pizza to an old guy, 70-ish, in a tiny standalone apartment. No shade, but my first impression was poor and feeble. The front door was a blanket, not like covering the open doorway, the literal front door in the middle of the city. I hear an old man's voice calling to me to step inside. The implication of needing me to come to him is crystal clear. His living room had a low glass table, a push mower, a small flat screen TV on a even smaller stand, and one dim yellow lamp next to a bed where he'd lie. The table was covered in nearly a dozen medicine bottles. The lawnmower is a little weird, but just major old and alone vibes, right? Until he pays me, male 26 at the time, and does the creepy hand touch and linger bit and goes, "Can I ask you a favor?" I'm just trying to deliver pizza, but I figure, hey, maybe I can give up a small amount of my time and make a feeble old person's day better and back before the manager notices. Maybe the touchy thing was just being old and weird. Maybe I'm making too much of it. Me, tell you what. Tell me what it is and I'll decide. Customer, go to the gas station down by the main road. That's pretty close, probably, and pick me up a couple 40s of Miller Lite. What? I'm not buying alcohol on the clock. I'm going to politely decline and excuse myself. And bring them back here. Not happening. Then when you get off of work, what? You can come back here and enjoy one with me. All of the alarm bells. Now, I noticed the razor blade, white powder, pill crusher, and rolled bill on the table next to him in the place most convenient to where he was sitting. Me. We're actually timed on our deliveries down to the minute. I'm really sorry, but I should head back to the store ASAP. Translation, well, I'm uncomfortable. He tries a little back and forth. Please, can you do this? And way pushy thing. But I brush him off and head back to the store with a story that I know will have to wait for close. That was about 12 years ago, and it still weirds me out. Story 65. I work as an internet installation technician. Fancy name for going to people's houses and running wires into the house and setting up a router. Anyways, there was one house that had the siding wilting off and showing rotting wood. I walked up to the front door and saw a flat screen TV. It looked brand new. I tapped it and out crawled, I would say, almost 30 cockroaches. Nice, the bugs fried it. I can't wait to see what the inside was like. I knocked, waited about 3 minutes, and they opened the door fully. The smell, imagine being punched by Mike Tyson with the worst smell imaginable. And no, I don't mean the worst smell imaginable. This was worse. It actually made me gag. And I worked with my father in pig farming as a kid, so I was used to crappy smells. But this? Oh dear God, it was awful. But what I saw was worse. Black mold on the walls, ceiling, and a black carpet. Looking at the corner, it used to be tan. Roaches crawling everywhere, the ceiling caving in from what I could guess was water damage, and 2 people easily pushing 500 pounds in weight sitting on a pull-out couch that smelled as if they hadn't showered in over a year. I never had to go inside, as they said they unsubscribed from our service. Thank the good Lord. One of my friends who did have to go in there described it as hell, actual hell, like living in sewage. He told me he put earplugs in his nose and chewed 3 sticks of gum to breathe in the mint smell to make it bearable. I have plenty more stories, as Nebraska has crap towns, we call them, and they are full of trashy, crackhead junk homes. If you're interested, just comment and I'll tell. Story 66. About 16 years ago, as a poor college grad, my girlfriend at the time was looking through Craigslist posting for quick work we could do to make a few extra bucks. There was a posting that stood out to us. It was $1,000 cash for 1 day of work. The posting was very terse and didn't have much info, just a number to call, the pay, and the instructions that this particular job was cleaning an apartment, and it had to be cleaned completely today. We thought, well, this sounds like an easy grand. We've cleaned up our mess of an apartment before. Why not? So we got the job. The Craigslist poster wasn't at the apartment when we arrived. There was just a note on the door indicating where the trash bags and cleaning supplies were. The key was under the mat. We opened the door. The front door opened into the side of the kitchen. The instant we opened the door, the sound caused approximately 1.2 million flies to go airborne off what I can describe as a gelatinous pile of decomposing, half-finished big gulps and fast food. That set the tone. The cabinets were full of rotting food. So rotten, it had leaked out and mold held cabinets shut. The sink was backed up. Garbage was everywhere, pressed into the floor and stacked about 3 foot below the ceiling in most places. The piles of garbage were a fascinating stratification or fossil record of the last decade or so. There were newspapers at the bottom mourning the death of Princess Diane. This person had a lot of trash and was clearly an insane hoarder. We chipped away slowly, filling bag after bag of just about everything we picked up. The bags were to be piled into the living room before we left. The pile grew quickly. Probably the worst part was the bathroom, which was so wretched we had to wear masks to even enter the room. The door was held open by garbage. Around the toilet, the entire area around the back of the toilet and the sides was packed with a combo of used tampons and other feminine waste. We had to use a small shovel to break it apart to throw it away in bags. The smell was absolutely incredible. We had no idea what we were signed up for. In the tub, it had a thick coating of some yellow goo, which, I think, has yet to be reproduced in the lab. The tub looked like it was filled with water and some sort of dead creatures like 20 years ago with a tampon-clogged drain, and it was allowed to slowly drain over years while everything inside decomposed. Imagine something evaporating and that's what's left. The saddest part was there was a kid's room. There was a bunk bed and the top bunk was only accessible by climbing up on the garbage. That part really broke my heart because it was clearly a very young kid and they probably knew what was going on and that it was bad. We dug our way through everything, bagged it all up, and called it a day. Screw that job, and it was not worth $1,000. Not even for a poor college student. Story 67. The first worst thing I've ever seen is my own body, but the close second is mice crawling out of the stove. I'm a caretaker, and I was picking up overtime in a group home I'd never been to before. A client was trying to swallow a whole clove of garlic and was about to choke on it. So I was struggling to get it out of her mouth when she pinned me up against the fridge and started pulling up my shirt while trying to bite me. The regular staff saw me struggling to put my shirt back down, but caught a glimpse of my disappointing A-cups and comparatively massive love handles. This is just my body type. I'm pear-shaped. Said, "Oh, heck no," and quit on the spot. The manager came in and yelled at me for not being able to get away from someone who was overpowering me, and for the sight of my stupid belly making one of her best staff leave the company entirely. When I suddenly saw a mouse crawl out of the stove, she was like, "What are you looking at?" And I was like, "There's a mice in your stove." And she gave me some attitude about, yeah, sometimes their stove does have mice living in it. What's it to me? That doesn't take away from what I did. They still kept asking me back due to being short-staffed, then perma-banned me once I caught COVID, so yeah. Nice place. Story 68. Did the equivalent of Geek Squad for a couple years. Went to a house to install a printer. Older lady, probably in her 70s. Led me to her bedroom where her laptop and printer are. The queen-sized bed is completely covered in papers, bills, or invoices, it appeared. Had to be 75 to 100 papers there covering the entire bed. My sense of smell is pretty poor from a previous concussion, but I kept getting a whiff of something really bad. Her laptop is so incredibly slow. It's taking forever for me to get this printer set up or even started. Trying to figure out what I can do to make this PC run a little faster, I realize Word is open. And not just a single document. When I mouse over it, it gives me a scroll bar of documents that are open. 82 documents she has open on this Toshiba laptop with 8 gigabytes of RAM. Plus other stuff. No wonder this thing was running like garbage. She disappeared. I can't find her anywhere to see if she can save some of this stuff and close it. Suddenly, I hear her yelling on the phone. Apparently, her daughter's maid of honor was telling her off. Now she's crying. I decided to just stay with this terrible computer for now. Heck, if I'm getting anywhere near that. Setup finally finishes, and now I have to find her to reboot this thing. I walk out to get her and see the husband is laying on the couch in nothing but a robe. He's surprised to see me, but makes no movement. Lucky I'm in a position where I can't see anything, cause he's clearly didn't care. She comes up and saves her stuff and reboots the laptop. I need her to log back in after she hangs around. She goes, "What's this?" Under a pile of papers on the dresser is a big glass bowl covered in aluminum foil. She lifts the aluminum foil, and bowels of Satan's a-hole came out and flooded the room. She just calmly goes, "Ew, potato salad," and takes it away. It had to be there for weeks. It was so horrible. I finish, and she asks if I can look at her husband's printer really quick. He's having some issues. I don't want to go back to the store, so I say sure. She leads me upstairs. Hiding behind this giant bookshelf desk in the middle of the room is, of course, the robe dude. He asked me some questions about why he can't print a video. He really is looking to print a paused image from a video. Stupidly, I ask him how he's doing, and it's adult content. He's trying to print out screenshots from his 8 terabyte adult content collection. And that was the day that I was done with that job. I think I went to one other house after that. That job sucked. Story 69. Been a massage therapist for 15 years. Had a very wealthy client, husband and wife. Have me come over for a massage. When I got there, they told me to set up in the bedroom, which is always shady, but I set up anyways. They had a huge 4-post bed. Got the table set up and worked on the husband first. Nothing out of the ordinary. His wife came in and I stepped out to let her undress. Now, she was a cliché trophy wife with fake breast and a personal trainer. I came back in and one of her breasts was slightly exposed. No biggie, happens from time to time. So I covered her up and got to work. While I was working, I started looking around the room more. Above the bed was some large metal eyelets. It took me a few seconds to figure out what they were doing there. Just then, I look down and she is looking up at me with a big smile. She says, "The whip is in the top drawer." I nervously laughed and finished the massage. They did tip me $200. That's just one of many stories from massage. Crazy job. Story 70. I've been going into people's houses for service calls for 15 years, so I've seen a lot, so it's hard to pick one. First off, I'd wager about 1 in 8 homes are completely hoarder-level filthy. It's not an economic race thing either. I've seen nasty rich people and nasty poor people of all ethnicities. The worst one I can think of off the top went to a guy's house that was a dirty hoarder. His house was filled with jars full of human feces and urine. My guess is his water got turned off a lot and his house was run down and he had plumbing issues. Still nasty though. Next, I went to a really old guy's house that was like 100. He had dementia. His house was infested with rats, like hundreds of them, to the point the floor was covered. He acted like he couldn't see them. I actually called the health department to get him help. Next, a crazy cat lady that had cages lining all the walls of her entire house from floor to ceiling, filled with cats. House smelled like ammonia so bad, I told them I couldn't work there. Went into a guy's apartment that had the worst roach infestation I've ever seen. I moved his couch to get an electrical outlet, and the entire back of his couch was covered with roaches. Like a complete wall of roaches. Millions of them. Made my skin crawl, and I still don't bring my work clothes into my house because of this. Finally, and this is the personal weirdest one for me, went into this guy's house that was a really weird guy. Weird, unshaven, hungover looking guy wearing a bathrobe in the afternoon. Has all his windows boarded up. I actually thought was sent to a condemned house until he answered the door when I was on the porch calling it in. Had a bunch of rooms in his house with multiple locks and chains on the doors. I was there to fix the wiring, and some of the wiring ran under one of the bedroom doors into the room. I told him I needed to look in the room and started walking in the direction. Guy literally sprints, stands in front of the door with his back pressed on the door and arms stretched out yelling, "You can't go in there!" Told him I need to look at the electrical meter in the backyard then. Guy has about 4 to 5 grave-sized deep holes dug in his backyard. At this point, I'm worried about this guy coming up behind me and hitting me with a shovel or something. Told the guy I had to get something from my truck and drove away. To this day, I still think this guy was a serial killer. Story 71. I work in EMS, and prior to that, I had experience working at a hazmat cleanup unit in the Coast Guard. Sounds odd, I know. I've seen my fair share of homes destroyed by natural disaster, human hoarding, but by far the worst thing I've ever seen was on a call for an unknown medical, common term for dispatches unable to determine what is wrong. It was my second year as an EMT, and we were on our way back from transporting a patient into the city when we got the call to go mutual aid into a fairly rich neighborhood that was outside our usual coverage area. This can happen when all of a town's resources are tied up. We pulled up to this really high-end condo or townhouse overlooking the ocean. It was beautiful on the outside. It gave no clue to what we were about to walk into. I grabbed some equipment while my partner went inside to check on the situation since no one was there to meet us. It only took me a few minutes to grab the bags, and as I turned around, my partner came running out of the condo looking green and shook up. He immediately called on the radio to get an advanced unit. They carry specialized equipment. We were a basic unit with limited options. I asked him what was wrong, and he couldn't even talk, just waved for me to follow him in. Behind the beautifully managed facade and impressive-looking front door was a house absolutely full of garbage. I don't mean like hoarding things, I mean straight garbage. Food containers, tissues, trash bags, full of even more stuff. Unidentifiable, disgusting collections of filth, and it was close to half a foot deep, cluttering the floor in every direction. I followed my partner, climbing up top as we made our way to the living room. There was a man on the stairs going on and on, semi-incoherently, about how he wasn't taking care of her anymore and she was going to die on that couch, and that's fine. She deserves to. When we made it to the living room is when we saw her. There were more than a few flies in the room, trash piled up all the way to the couch, and this woman just sitting there. Shallow breaths, non-responsive, but eyes open, staring at the wall. She was wearing normal-sized clothes, but she appeared to be swimming in them. Her arms were stick thin, and all around her, the area of the couch she was sitting on was completely filthy and greasy looking. 3/4 of the couch looked almost brand new, but the cushion she was on looked sunken and partially collapsed. We tried to get her vitals, but her arms were too small to get pressure on with an adult cuff, and the pediatric one was in the truck. My partner went to get a scoop stretcher, think a litter that can break into 2 pieces and slide under someone before it comes back together, and some straps so we could get her out. The old man on the steps started talking about aliens and the Chinese, and finally the fire department showed up. My partner came back with them and the scoop. We got her on and struggled our way out of the house with the crazy old man shouting incoherently upstairs. I have no idea what, as I could no longer hear clearly. As we get this woman outside, the advanced medic truck pulled up, so we loaded her right into them. We assisted getting this woman prepped. We used the trauma shear to remove the clothing because, honestly, she had been on the same position in that couch for some time, judging by the state of the couch cushions after we lifted her off, and her clothes were filthy from urine and feces. Everything was hanging on her like she was a child wearing her parents' clothes, except that it was the right length. The most horrifying part was when we cut off the yoga pants. Each leg was filled with feces, which were crawling with bugs. The initial trauma exam showed no injuries, but this woman looked exactly like a World War II concentration camp survivor, straight out of a documentary I recall watching. We were close enough to the city that the medics just decided to head for the hospital top speed. Me and my partner were no longer needed, so we got back in the truck and headed back to the base. It hit me when we were leaving and I looked back at the place we were leaving. With the door closed, you would have no idea about the horror show we just walked into. It could have been anyone's neighbor. I mean, how often do you go into your neighbor's house? I've never really talked about this call, and it happened a few years ago now. It's odd how well I still remember it. Never did find out what happened to the patient. I don't think I really wanted to know at the time. Story 72. A puddle that was once a dead cat. It was under some dude's corner table, so I didn't see it at first. The flies that freaked out when I got close was what sent me the frick out of there. I should have known there was something wrong by the smell when I walked in. Some lady hopped in the shower when I got there, just so she could come out in almost nothing, asking if I called for her, and her presumably husband was present the whole time. Happened to another coworker of mine at the same place. Pretty sure the couple were trying to get off on us seeing them, or I don't know, it was strange. Found a dead bird packed into someone's dryer vent. Not in the walls, like still in the vent part of the dryer. Along this same note, I saw a washing machine infested with cockroaches, and a move had completely eaten all the rubber tubing, and eventually chewed through a wire and totally killed it. Peacocks, and various other wacky birds. I'm in Canada, so that was surprising. Adult content images. Not like a painting or a poster, like printed out from their household printer, and these were taped all over the wall. Bonus is I was there to replace and install their new printer. Obviously, they tested it while I was there and printed out more adult content. The grin on that guy's face, disturbing. I'm sure I have more stories kicking around in my head somewhere. Story 73. Late to the party, but still, I used to work as a delivery guy long ago. Specifically, a delivery guy for a specific supermarket. One of the rules for delivery guys was that you can get in people's homes and arrange their order, like put stuff in the fridge, put the pasta on the shelf if the client requests you to. You don't expect weird crap from a supermarket. Do you? Also, I just got out of the army. Some weeks pass, and this oldish, about 65 to 70-year-old lady makes an order. It is important to describe her for this story. About 1/3 of white hairs, as in she's old, not a dye job. On her head, reasonable body, very high heels and other exposition, impressive legs and arms. She works out, kind of weird chest, like she's not sagging on the floor. There's definitely some sagging, but I don't know, a bad boob job attempt perhaps? She holds herself well and has this, let's call it aura about her, like she's above us, mere mortals, and she knows it. But most notably, her order. 2 crates, 32 by 40 cartons, I don't remember if the crates were arranged in 4 by 4 or 5 by 5, of milk, 2 watermelons, the biggest we have, a bunch more heavy stuff, and normal, not heavy food. Now, I don't want to brag or anything, but I was, let's say, slightly above average muscular for my age. Like, I wasn't going to the gym or anything, but regardless of who you are, the army, any army, after leaving, it'll leave you buffish. Not Dwayne Johnson, but you do get muscle, even as a girl, especially as a girl. That one weirds me out, to be honest. Not everyone can be Givati or Okiz, special ops. There are a lot more, let's say, peaceful divisions than there are not. I was a paratrooper in the entire parachute folding squad, and as I learned later, divisions, all of them, is girls. Tower watchers, girls. Radio squad, girls. Weapon cleaners, girls. Staff in general, I might have one guy in there. Not sure if it's a guy or a girl with a buzz cut. Still, the girls come out all buff as heck. They can be bouncers after the army. We guys get only slightly more buff. This lady asks for delivery by foot, as in she walks home, I go with her, and when we get to her home, I unpack and go away. I'm naturally upset because now I have to figure out how to deliver the watermelons. Watermelons are round. Everything else fits in the box as well, but the watermelons don't. I go to the back to take not one, but two, watermelon boxes for the watermelons, and then argue with one of the owners about how, due to their size, I can't deliver them safely in a single box. It took him like 20 minutes to reach the same conclusion I did in seconds. In the meantime, the lady runs off. I may not be a bat, but I swear I heard these heels like 100 meters away. I prepare mentally, ponder how I'm going to rest with these watermelons not bursting while I take a minute or two off because her house is at an incline, and later ponder how I'm going to not die holding the cart because, as it turns out, her house has a few steps down. Managed to not die on those stairs, knock on the door, apologize for being sweaty and disgusting. Australians, I think, will understand Israel's summer, and then manage to look at her. Holy crap! While I was walking there, she changed clothes. Normally, changing clothes even after going out for a little in Israel is not unheard of. It's just that she changed to different clothes that are out of the norm for summer. Thigh boots, leather skirt, I don't even know what it's called. Imagine a chimera between a really short but comfortable dress and a corset. She also had these super long leather gloves and a crop stick. Now, I get it. You're a retired dominatrix. You want to relive your old days. You want to order a guy around. You want to be all dominatrixy while the guy wants the sweet, sweet release of death at this point. I don't blame you. I, too, wish I could relive my days as a paratrooper. Thing is, that's not the way to do this. The only reason I'm arranging stuff for you is because you're elderly, and both you and I don't want you to unpack the 2 crates of milk or heave those freaking watermelons. While I was unpacking her stuff, she was pointing at where she wants what with her crop stick and saying stuff like, "Wow, you're sweaty. I didn't make you too tired, did I? And I hope I didn't bother you with my order," with a wink and stuff like that. It was more weird than disgusting. It was still disgusting because she was like 3 to 4 times my age, though. Story 74. For a change of pace, I'll mention a house I lived in briefly. We moved to this tiny little town when I was a kid. And when I say tiny, I mean less than 600 people. The house we rented was an old farmhouse that was at least 100 years old and not in great condition. It was weird as heck. Shortly after moving in, we found a hidden room that was stacked to the ceiling with old antique furniture. Chairs, desks, tables, the works. But not the usual sort of house furniture. No couches or comfortable chairs, no beds, etc. The owner, who had only bought it a couple years prior, had no idea about the hidden room nor where the furniture had come from, but it was behind a thin paneled wall with no door, so we don't even know how they got the furniture in there in the first place, or why they would have paneled it up after the fact if it was done that way. When the first water bill came, it said we had used 40,000 gallons of water. We had seen no evidence of a leak anywhere in the house. We searched around the property, even, and found nothing. Finally, Dad thought to check the cellar. It was a weird arrangement. It had the big angled doors like you see on storm cellars and the like, but the entrance was inside the kitchen, and found it completely flooded. The water was about an inch below the floor level of the kitchen. We had never even been down there, so we had no clue what had been in there or even why it had water pipes running through it. Dad called a company to come pump it out so a plumber could get in to fix it and found that there wasn't a single water pipe running through it. We had no idea where the water came from. Behind the house was another structure about as old as the house itself. It was like a long garage with the windows all the way around and just one regular door on the side. It was pretty overgrown around the outside of it, but looking through the windows, you could tell it was full of old commercial shelving with an ancient cash register on a counter at one end, like someone had run a store out of it at some point. I should mention the house was far enough out in the countryside that the nearest neighbor was 1.5 miles away, and the building was tucked in behind the house, so it couldn't be seen from the road. Not exactly the best location for a store. Finally, the big one. The drains and faucets everywhere in the house were electrified. We kept getting shocked from them now and then, and finally Dad called the power company out. Over the course of 3 months, they brought out techs, then engineers, then senior engineers, and no one could figure out why. They checked and then replaced all of the external wiring. They drove something like 30 ground rods in, they pulled the meter, and ultimately pulled every meter in a 10-mile radius. Still, every drain and faucet in the house was electrified. In the process, they also noticed that other things on the property were electrified too that definitely were not hooked up to wires, like the thankfully empty 500-gallon propane tank next to the house. After months of dealing with this and being no closer to even finding out what was going on, much less fixing it, we finally gave up and moved. This reminds me of my days back when I was in the Boy Scouts. At one summer camp in particular, the faucets in the shower were electrified, and no one knew why, and honestly, no one seemed to care. But it was a pain that you had to carefully touch the faucet, even though you would get shocked regardless. Showering was not fun. Story 75. Oh boy, are you ready? You're not. I did plumbing for a while, and the most memorable service call was a clogged sink in a crappy little apartment complex. I show up, and the maintenance guy asks if I want him with me, which was odd since we were fairly used to each other at this point, to visit the unit. I let him know I'm good and proceed to meet with the tenant. Old junkie, white guy, answers the door entirely naked. Weird, but not the weirdest thing I've seen by far. I do my normal, hey, you have an issue? Spiel and move from the front door back into the adjoining bedroom and bathroom. There on the bed are 2 young black men, naked and collared. One has a ball gag in his mouth. Both are blushing hard. I just kind of froze and averted my eyes. Consensual? I ask. The gagged one just goes, and nods empathetically. The other won't speak or meet my eyes. I just shook my head and got the job done before leaving. The maintenance guy just about died of laughing when I told him about it after I cleared the line and left. Apparently, that was not even a little unusual for this tenant. We're not done. I did crime scene cleanup for a while too. I have hoarding stories, infestations, violent crimes, drug use stories, you name it. 2 stick out as memorable. The first was in a very expensive area, $1 million plus homes. The person had passed away months before anyone realized they had expired. The smell of decay was obvious from the driveway about 100 feet from the entrance. Usually the body has been removed by the time we arrive, but this person had straight up liquefied in the time since their death. The bones had been removed, but the rest of the body, which had done as bodies do over time, was all over the entryway. Skin, an eyeball, hair, organs, yeah. There was also an immense amount of flies and rats enjoying the smorgasbord. Even fully suited and masked, the smell stuck in my nose for months. The second was not properly vetted by dispatch. The customer refused to give a name, wanted to meet at a very unusual time, and wanted to pay cash, up front. Needless to say, I refused the job. Another team did not, and they ended up on the news after being detained by law enforcement. There's still an NDA around the whole situation for those involved, but I never signed one. That said, I'm not going into more detail because of it. It was a fairly large story in the area it happened, so details aren't really copacetic. Story 76. So my girlfriend used to work for social care. Her role was to visit old people's homes and care homes to see what equipment they could use to make life easier for them. She was shadowing this other colleague for the day as she was still starting out. Sadly, she had to go to a dementia care home, which must have been upsetting. They were doing an assessment on this elderly lady who had severe dementia. She wasn't replying to anything they said, she wouldn't move when asked, and the assessment was unfortunately pointless due to how bad she was. So they finished the assessment on the lady and drove back to the office, where they get a call, and it was the dementia care home manager. She explained that there was no need to complete the assessment. This was due to the fact the woman had been dead all morning, meaning when they were assessing this elderly lady, she had been dead and nobody had realized. Story 77. My weirdest and most disturbing experience was as a pizza delivery driver in a small town. On the outside, the house looked normal enough. It was a common residential neighborhood. But as I approached the front door, I noticed a note that read, "Deliveries, use servant's entrance." Odd phrasing, but I walk along the sidewalk to a side door, knock, and crap goes crazy. I am particularly blinded as the door is opened and super bright fluorescent lights shine out. I noticed I'm in a room with 3 washers and dryers. A black woman in a maid's outfit tells me to put on shoe covers and move around to the main house. An old woman comes downstairs and looks at me, and in a thick southern drawl, she says she had to go get her pocketbook and to please wait in the foyer. I wasn't going back to where I entered, so I moved down the hall the other direction. First thing I noticed was an old man in a recliner. I tried to talk to him after we stared at each other for too long, but then he started screaming. At first, I asked if he was okay, but then it dawned at me that he likely had dementia, and I did my best to try to ignore him. I started to scan the room to avoid looking at this screaming stranger. First, I scanned the bookshelf. I see all kinds of Nazi books. Then I noticed an SS hat. That was it. I put the food down and made for the exit. I asked the maid to come outside with me and asked if she needed help, if she was some kind of slave or prisoner in the house. She assured me she was well taken care of. I shrugged and left, but when I got back to work, I told my boss I would call for a police escort if I ever had to deliver to that house again. Story 78. It wasn't me directly, still the most disgusting thing I've ever seen. I'm from Budapest and I visit once a year for 2 weeks. I always book an apartment on Airbnb. This one wasn't in the best part of town, but also not the worst. Usual old house with a yard in the middle. The apartment itself was fully renovated with air conditioning, fancy bathroom, with whirlpool, etc. After 10 days, I realized I've never seen anyone in the flat next to me, nor I've noticed any light in the flat. The windows were covered with heavy curtains. The only things I saw were pigeons and piles of bird crap, but only in front of the apartment. No one else seemed to be bothered about it, but I asked the other neighbors who were smoking outside speaking Hungarian what's up. They told me an old lady lives there, but they see her only twice a month when she gets groceries. She won't let anyone in and doesn't want help. 2 days later, I got back from a night out, and the paramedics were in front of the apartment. They were all very pale, gagging, and saying things like, "I can't do this, I need to vomit." The windows and the door were open, and that's when I saw, and smelled, a lot of things. The apartment was full of junk. Old newspapers, food, clothes, garbage bags, and the toilet had a huge pile of feces almost up to the ceiling, and those apartments have very tall ceilings. But that wasn't the worst part. She apparently let the pigeons live inside. There were tiny pigeons and eggs all over the windowsill. The paramedics tried to figure out what to do with them. The lady had a medical emergency, and I left the next day, so I didn't know what happened after that. 2 weeks later, there was an article about her on an online news site. It turns out she will return to the apartment since there's no law in Hungary that says you can't live like this, and there are basically no psychiatric hospitals anymore. So they can recommend outpatient care, but the lady isn't required to go to the appointments. It's the most disgusting and horrifying thing I've seen to this day. I'm sure she's not the only one living like this. And that will be our last story for the day. If you made it this far, thank you. Be sure to subscribe to Undersparked and like the video. Comment and let us know down below what your favorite story was. And with that, we'll see you in the next video.